Chapter 2155. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Ignoring the pleas at his feet, the Slayer's palm covered the top of Rual Ling's head with divine light and gently seeped into her spirit. His technique was much gentler. Even so, Rual Ling could not bear it. Her head was covered in cold sweat, and her face was pale. Her body trembled as if it would turn into a bloody mess at any moment. "You are smarter than I thought." The young man glanced at the Wu Shun at his feet and slowly withdrew his hand from Rual Ling's head. In an instant, Rual Ling fainted and fell to the ground unconscious. "I don't understand your divine will at all. I am innocent." The Wu Shun held the unconscious Rual Ling. The Slayer's pressure had almost shattered his divine spirit. Although he was nervous, his concern for Rual Ling was real. He could not pretend to be heartbroken and helpless. The young man did not linger. He walked to the edge of the divine palace and looked down at the vast land below. He closed his noble eyes slightly. Suddenly, a shocking slaughter divine will filled the air. A black wheel of light that could make even gods tremble wrapped around his body like a divine python. In the dark and dense wheel, there was not a single divine pattern that symbolized cultivation. It was as if his entire wheel was made up of dense divine meridians. If this scene was seen by Qin Hao, he would probably be shocked to the point that his heart would be unable to calm down. Buzz! The divine will of Tian Luan covered the area, and a vast murderous aura seeped into the heavens and earth, as if it was forcefully blending with the heavenly path. At this moment, the black divine light on the young man's body surged to the extreme, and the faintly discernible fluctuation of the divine will that permeated the area made the heavenly path unable to withstand it, and a few cracking sounds were heard. At the same time, the Wu Shun, who was kneeling and holding his daughter, clearly felt something. It was as if an external force had taken something from his body, and he instantly lost control of the heavenly path. At this moment, the young man slowly opened his eyes. His pupils were pitch black without a trace of white. Just looking at them would make one's hair stand on end. His thick black hair that almost touched the ground fluttered in the wind. In the depths of the young man's pitch-black pupils, fragments of what had happened in the heavenly path appeared. He had witnessed the entire battle in the sacred city. Dong! Indistinctly, there seemed to be the sound of his heart exploding. Hugging Rual Ling, the Wu Shun's body tensed up, and he even forgot to cry. Cold sweat, due to fear, gradually dripped down his body and dripped down his face onto Rual Ling's pale face. At this moment, the Slayer could see from the heavenly axiom that the boundless, sinful refinement disciples were attacking the city. One side was defending, while the other side was attacking. All these unimportant things were swept away by him, and he directly came to the most important scene. A divine tribulation descended from the sky. Ho, who was kneeling behind him, appeared in the divine tribulation. Will lights appeared, forming a holy heavenly wheel. The image flowed very fast, so fast that it was as if it had been cut off and became blurry. When it became clear again, the young man saw 3 trident gods falling one after another. Among them, the previous plane ruler had exploded into a ball of blood. Only one figure was left standing in the void. It was Ho, as well as the believers of the holy city who were sprawled all over the ground. The ruler of the plane was replaced by a newly promoted god, Wang. The intense killing intent that was rolling around the young man's body dissipated, and the terrifying black wheel of light also retracted into his body. At this moment, Ho felt the will of the heavenly axiom return to his body. The great heavenly wheel killed 3 lesser heavenly wheels. Although the grade was suppressed, it was still rare. Watch over the plane for the divine master and wait for orders from the divine realm. The Slayer turned around and looked at the kneeling Wu god. He saw that the Wu god had lost his soul, and his face was blank and lifeless. He chuckled softly and said, "It is my duty to monitor the divine dominion plane. I will not take away your authority. Also, before the flames of war completely die down, do your best to cultivate a new god. Otherwise, I will use you as a test." Whoosh! Without waiting for a reply, the young man transformed into a pitch-black beam of light and flew out of the temple into the boundless wilderness, disappearing into the turbulence outside the heavenly axiom. Thump! Ho's body tilted, and he almost fell to the ground. As the Slayer left, the will that crushed the temple disappeared. Ho! Salo and the other divine guards hurriedly stood up and went to support Ho. Ha ha ha! Ho laughed dryly with a trembling voice. His laughter grew louder and louder, echoing in the air. That was really dangerous. Facing the Slayer head-on, that aura had almost caused Ho to collapse. Fortunately, before the Slayer came, he had even distorted the heavenly axiom and cut off the image of Qin Hao. Otherwise, it would be difficult to escape this calamity. Fortunately, he had made it through. Just as the rumors said, the Slayer was so strong that he seemed to be above the gods. He was an undisputed sovereign. If possible, Ho did not want to face him again in this life. God, who was that great person just now? Why are you afraid of him? Salo scratched his head. With his current knowledge, he did not understand the depths of the divine path. He thought that Emperor Ho would be the strongest after the Realm Master. Ho did not answer Salo's question. He shook his head, picked up Ruo Ling, and stood up. Salo, I will be in seclusion for a while. If there is nothing urgent, do not disturb me. After he finished speaking, he walked into the shrine. His footsteps were very shaky. This? Salo looked at Ho's back, unable to understand. In the vast universe, the Slayer was in the midst of raging turbulence. He silently looked at the plane that the Four Tribe had once ruled. His flashing eyes seemed to have seen everything that had happened after he left. A cold smile appeared on his lips. Crude methods. How foolish. But he is quite bold. I want to see what changes will happen to the massacre world, the young man muttered to himself. His black hair fluttered as he returned to the core of the divine realm. With his eyesight and mystiques, how could he not see through Ho's clumsy methods? The heavenly axiom had clearly been distorted, and some important imprints had been erased. However, the Slayer didn't take this to heart. His tyrannical strength allowed him to have absolute control over the slaughter world. No matter what the sea god was up to behind his back, it wouldn't be able to cause the slightest disturbance in front of him. As for the fugitive mentioned by the Heavenly Edict soldiers, could he really be with Ho? When fate comes, someone will deliver what you want. That is exactly what you want. God Lord Azura often muttered these words to himself in a daze, especially when he couldn't control himself and was about to explode. These words were like a clear spring that could wash away the crazed killing intent in Azura's heart. Old monk, I hope you didn't lie to my divine lord. Alas! The young man sighed and disappeared into the boundless wilderness. The Baldi of the Southern Heaven Buddhist realm would not lie. Besides, the one they had requested to meet was an eminent monk who played an important role in the Buddhist realm. In order to find the missing soul, Azura and the Slayer had gone through many difficulties before they finally got the chance to meet him. Fortunately, the Buddhist realm was merciful and did not despise the blood-stained hands of the massacre world. Only then did the monk give them a precious prophecy. Azura and his divine servant, the Slayer, had waited for a very, very long time. They couldn't remember exactly how many years it had been. But now, the Heavenly Edict soldiers were invading the divine realm. Could the fugitive be related to the prophecy? When fate comes, someone will deliver what you want. Let's hope so. Let's hope Azura's missing soul comes back soon. In the Dao Peak where he was in seclusion, Qin Hao used the Divine Palace Yin-E formation to set up the original realm's mini-universe. His aura merged with the heavenly Dao of the massacre world. Unless it was destroyed by force, it would be very difficult to discover his existence. Moreover, the Wu God helped to erase his traces. The endless reincarnation made Qin Hao, who was cultivating, feel tireless. The mini-universe formation absorbed the spiritual energy of the earth veins and transmitted it into the reincarnation field inside the reincarnation mirror. While tempering his divine soul, divine power, and divine body, Qin Hao also greedily absorbed the pure massacre Dao will of the massacre world. In the past 100 years, his body had undergone an extremely shocking change. Just like when he made up his mind, he would completely become the god of the massacre world. He would completely merge with the massacre world and become a true killer like the Wu god. There was no possibility of him being exposed. Time flew by. More than 100 years passed in the blink of an eye. On the day when the flames of war in the entire massacre world had completely subsided, the Wu god, who was floating in the sky, received a divine order from the divine realm. He was to bring the newly ascended Tianluan of the upper realm to the divine realm to report. According to the agreement, this was also the day Qin Hao came out of seclusion. Boom! In the vast sky, a majestic divine aura pressed down, covering everything on the earth. As the aura that contained the pure massacre Tao will fill the air, there seemed to be a faint call. It was the Wu god's voice calling out to Qin Hao. Over and over again, the divine aura fell several times. But unlike the agreement, the Wu god still did not receive any response from Qin Hao. I don't know if it will affect the supreme god, but I have no choice. The Wu god stepped out of the temple and floated at the top of the sky. The light of the divine path wheel bloomed and gathered above his head. Suddenly, the massacred Tao will of the heavenly Tao gathered majestically and gathered into a heavenly aura. He stared at the continent and wanted to destroy it with his palm. Boom! Pong! Just as his palm landed, he suddenly saw a beam of light shoot up from the ground in the distance. It was as if a mountain had suddenly exploded. A violent, killing aura surged out and swept through the sky, shaking the temple beneath his feet violently. Congratulations, Supreme God, on coming out of seclusion. In an uninhabited mountain range, a few small demons stood respectfully in a huge pit and bowed to the sky. They were all excited and could not help but worship. The mountain that had been in seclusion had disappeared, and a figure floated above the huge pit. His silver hair swayed, and the pure massacre Tao, while gathered on his body, was probably even stronger than in this dimension. Buzz! Qin Hao opened his arms, and a dazzling wheel light bloomed. Following the appearance of the perfect heavenly wheel, 3 resplendent runes flashed at the edge of the wheel light. 1 red, 1 white, and 1 black. The 3 runes revolved around the wheel light, flowing through Qin Hao's body. The terrifying aura caused the heavenly Tao to tremble and wail. Congratulations, Supreme God! A beam of light fell and descended in front of Qin Hao. The Wu god was overjoyed. After descending slightly, he cupped his fists and bowed to Qin Hao. Thank you for taking care of me all these years. Qin Hao nodded slightly to the Wu god. Without the Wu god, he would not have cultivated for more than 100 years, and he would not have the 3 new veins on his Tianlun. Qin Hao didn't know if the Heavenly Imperial Army had come to investigate the plane, but if Jun Mo appeared in front of him at this moment, with his perfect heaven wheel and his 30,000 years of cultivation, he had absolute confidence that he could fight a fierce battle. Moreover, it wouldn't be as tragic as the floating glass dojo. Now, even if he faced the high and mighty Divine Prince, he was qualified to control his own fate. The error-free chapters of Primordial Alchemist will continue to be updated in the new Booksy Pavilion. There are no advertisements on the website. Please bookmark and recommend the new Booksy Pavilion. If you like Primordial Alchemist, please bookmark. Primordial Alchemist's new Booksy Pavilion is the fastest to update. Chapter 2156. Perfect Sky Wheels. Their cultivation and conditions were equal, so it was a matter of whose divine power was superior. In this context, the greater the amount of divine power one had, the more flexible one could use it in battle. Coupled with rich battle experience and powerful divine techniques, the perfect sky wheels could determine victory and defeat. Qin Hao had a certain advantage over Jun Mo in these aspects. He had 4 types of divine power: the Red Lotus Fire, Space, Slaughter, and his trump card, the Extreme Evil Power, which he had yet to use. In contrast, Jun Mo only had 1. The only thing that gave Qin Hao a headache was the divine weapon. The Great Void Cauldron had been refined through reincarnation, and its power had increased greatly. However, it was still inferior to Jun Mo's Sky Splitter. The divine weapon was probably the only thing Junimo had that could suppress Qin Hao. It was even stronger than the divine weapons nurtured by the divine lords. Even so, Qin Hao might not necessarily lose in a real fight. Junmo's cultivation was limited, so he could not fully utilize the Sky Splitter's power. What level is the exalted god at now? The Wu god gazed at Qin Hao's sky wheel. It was extremely dazzling, and the flowing divine was abnormally turbulent. It covered his entire body, leaving no blind spots. It was as if the Qin Hao in front of him was not a person or a god, but a world that encompassed all things and was one with the great Tao. In particular, the seemingly small black line at the edge of Qin Hao's sky wheel exuded a killing intent that was even stronger than that of the Wu god, who wielded the heavenly Tao, pure and flawless. This made the Wu god wonder if Qin Hao would take control of the plane from him like the Slayer if he wanted to, just like the Slayer. Qin Hao's killing intent was too pure and strong. Just as he had said before he went into seclusion, he had transformed into a true Slayer, no different from a god of the world of slaughter. If the Wu god did not know about Qin Hao's background, he would have thought that he was his colleague and more qualified to be the plane's ruler. Just like you, I'm still in the divine path. In the divine path heavenly wheel, there's no distinction between realms below the divine master level. Qin Hao pointed at the 3 thin rays of light that were flickering on the edge of his sky wheel. Each of these divine patterns is a 10,000-year-old sky wheel. Every additional pattern represents an additional 10,000-year-old sky wheel. You only have one. In order to confirm Qin Hao's words, the sea god immediately released the sky wheel. He saw that there was indeed only one, and it was even fainter than any of the runes on Qin Hao's body. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't have noticed it. No wonder. The Wu god sighed. When he faced Qin Hao, he felt such a strong pressure because his cultivation was too low. Your heavenly wheel is incomplete, Qin Hao explained simply. You can't use your god power, so you have many fatal weaknesses. Such heavenly wheels are called major heavenly wheels. The 3 trident gods I killed were minor heavenly wheels. In the path of godhood, the level of one's heavenly wheel, the level of one's Tao, the amount of god power one possesses, and the divine techniques one cultivates all determine one's battle prowess. The Wu god had just become a god 100 years ago and was considered a newbie. His understanding of the divine path was very shallow, and he needed to learn more in the future. It wasn't something that could be explained overnight. Phew! The Wu god exhaled heavily. The divine path heavenly wheel was actually so profound. It seemed that he still had a long way to go. At this time, he smiled at Qin Hao. Compared to the Supreme God, I'm as weak as a mortal. Now it seems that Supreme God is more like a god of slaughter who controls the heavenly Tao. He didn't understand how Qin Hao did it, because different heavenly Taos gave birth to different beings. They were born with different innate abilities. Logically speaking, it was impossible for gods from the outside world to cultivate and control the power of this world. However, Qin Hao had done it. The aura he emitted was even purer than the pure cultivators of the slaughter world. Qin Hao smiled but didn't explain. The current me is still not enough. Qin Hao clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and let out a low roar. Traces of blood flowed from his gums to the corner of his mouth. Suddenly, the sky wheel exploded and lit up with a terrifying light. Then, chaotic laws wreaked havoc, and the Wu god was sent flying. In the next second, the 3 divine glyphs at the edge of Qin Hao's sky wheel underwent a shocking change. The red and white divine glyphs gradually lost their luster and became extremely dim. However, the last black divine glyph's divine power surged and corroded the other 2 divine glyphs, turning them black. In an instant, Qin Hao's 3 divine glyphs flowed with the divine intent of slaughter. The red lotus fire and the space divine power condensed in the infinite divine domain were all destroyed. Exalted God, why are you doing this? The Wu god's heart twitched violently as he looked at Qin Hao covered in blood. It was obvious that he had suffered extremely serious injuries. However, from this moment on, the Wu god sensed that Qin Hao's aura of slaughter had become even more intense. It was so intense that it was even stronger than the heavenly Tao. This strength exceeded his understanding of the divine Tao. Only this way can I be considered the true god of slaughter. Qin Hao raised his head again. His eyes were as cold as the abyss, and his silver hair had turned black for some unknown reason. His temperament was so cold that he didn't seem human at all. Even gods would tremble upon seeing him. Wu Gahal. Qin Hao led the 8 lesser Yao back here. Crippling the Red Lotus divine power and Space divine power had caused great harm to Qin Hao. Not only had he temporarily lost these 2 tyrannical powers, but his sky wheel had also been severely damaged. Fortunately, Qin Hao's sky wheel was perfect. It was one with the universe and had the ability to repair itself. However, it would be extremely difficult for the Red Lotus Fire and Space Divine Power to recover. Qin Hao had no choice. If he wanted to completely transform into the Sky Wheel of Slaughter, he had to cripple his previous divine power. The Wu god's cultivation was low, so he couldn't see anything from Qin Hao's body or aura. However, he would have to traverse the Sky Wheel of Slaughter. Along the way, he would inevitably encounter powerful slaughter gods, and even divine Lord Azura. When that time came, how could Azura not see through him? The Red Lotus Fire had accompanied Qin Hao for his entire life, from mortal to divine. It was like a close friend, and he didn't want to cripple it. Perhaps it would take a long time for him to get used to it. However, those who wanted to achieve great things had to make trade-offs. In the Battle of the Avicii Divine Domain, how many sword gods had fallen? Senior Avicii, Venerable Dongsheng, Great Sikong, Teacher Blind Sword, Patriarch Severing Emotions, and many other elders. Qin Hao's heart ached so much that he didn't dare to think about them. In order to save his life, these powerful beings were willing to sacrifice themselves. Today, he crippled 2 divine powers. Qin Hao's sky wheel was perfect, and the essence of Tao was imprinted in his sky wheel. He had only temporarily lost 2 divine powers. In the future, he would have a chance to cultivate them back. However, if Divine Lord Azura found out that he wasn't from the Sky Wheel of Slaughter, he would die without a burial place. Qin Hao was decisive in deciding what was more important. The exalted god is really ruthless. Within the Jade Pavilion, the 2 of them chatted as they watched Qin Hao cripple his own god force. That bloody scene and his determination made the Wu divinity feel the pain. If he had been in Qin Hao's shoes, he would have died on the spot. However, the Wu god knew that Qin Hao's divine Tao was different from ordinary people. He had managed to survive, and his divine will of slaughter had become even stronger. Although his method was a bit ruthless, the Wu god thought of the opponent who had chased after Qin Hao and suddenly felt that his method was very appropriate. Qin Hao waved his hand at the Wu god and said, "Don't mention my matters again. Tell me, what orders did the Sky Wheel of Slaughter give you?" Before entering seclusion, Qin Hao learned from the Wu god that after all the plane's fire beacon calamities were extinguished, the rulers needed to bring the new gods to the Sky Wheel of Slaughter to meet the Divine Lord. Now, Qin Hao could be considered a new Sky Wheel cultivator of the Path of Slaughter. If he wanted to pass through the Sky Wheel of Slaughter, he would have to make a trip to the Sky Wheel of Slaughter. Take a look at these first. The Wu god wasn't in a hurry to explain to Qin Hao. With a wave of his hand, images appeared in front of Qin Hao, captured from the heavenly Tao and reproduced. The error-free chapters of Primordial Pill Venerate will continue to be updated in the new book pavilion. There will be no advertisements on the website. Please bookmark and recommend the new book pavilion. If you like Primordial Pill Venerate, please bookmark. Primordial Pill Venerate's new book pavilion updates the fastest. Chapter 2157. In the image, a black-haired young man in a red robe exerted great pressure. He constantly released the power of his divine soul and took over the bodies of cultivators from the lower realms, prying into their lives as if he was looking for something. Next was Ruo Ling. When Qin Hao saw the young man prying into the heavenly path, he immediately tensed up, especially the young man's body. The The sky wheel that coiled around Qin Hao's body like a black python was pitch black in color. Qin Hao couldn't see the slightest trace of divine inscriptions within the intense black light. At that moment, Qin Hao was so shocked that he almost stood up from his seat. What kind of power was this? What level of divine path did he belong to? Was he a divine master? No, it wasn't the divine master, because Qin Hao had seen what the divine master's Tianlun looked like. Avicii, Lu Shun, Dragon Master, as well as Fun Wei, Xin Qi, and the 10 Ultimates. He had seen them all. Those divine masters had divine inscriptions. However, this terrifying black-haired youth actually did not have any divine inscriptions. Moreover, even from the memory of the heavenly path, Qin Hao could feel the tyrannical aura of the other party. Even if he was now at the 3 inscriptions divine path, he would definitely not be able to withstand a blow from the other party. For a moment, Qin Hao couldn't figure out the young man's level of power. Who is this? Qin Hao breathed heavily, and his pupils dilated. Before he knew it, his cheeks were covered in sweat. The Slayer. As he spoke the name, his voice was laced with uncontrollable fear and a strong sense of respect. He is a servant of the Azura God. However, Supreme God, you must understand that the entire Slaughter God realm is run by the Slayers. They are second only to the God Lord and above all other gods. They are uncrowned. Qin Hao was speechless. The Slayer was no different from the Divine Lord. According to the records of the Heavenly Tao, something happened to God Lord Azura, and he seemed to have been severely injured. That's why the Slayers have been in charge of the slaughtering world all these years, and have been protecting the family property on behalf of the God Lord, the Wu God said. How long has he followed the Divine Lord? How is his cultivation? Qin Hao asked cautiously. I don't know anything about this. It seems that when the killing world was formed, the Slayers were already following the Lord God. Wu God's words made Qin Hao gasp. At the beginning of the primal chaos, the primordial world was established. From the looks of it, the young man in the picture was an old demon spirit. Although he wasn't a divine master, his cultivation might be far superior to Senior Wujian and the other divine masters. This kind of monster must not be provoked. Qin Hao patted Dusk's shoulder. He could already understand how Dusk felt when facing the Slayers. You're frightened, he said. An embarrassed smile appeared on Tian Ho's face as he said, It was a little dangerous, but fortunately, we managed to muddle through it. However, while you were in seclusion, several major events occurred in the divine world. Something big? Qin Hao frowned and sat back down. Dusk looked at Qin Hao with a sharp gaze and a hint of sympathy. Divine King Tian Zhao's subordinates ventured into the divine world. 15 of them came, but only 1 returned. The Slayers killed them all, and even the one who returned lost an arm. Dusk slowly stood up, straightened his back, and proudly raised his head. Mimicking the Slayers, Dusk pointed at Qin Hao and said, A broken arm is a warning. Go back and tell Divine King Tian Zhao and some bullshit Divine Prince that if they dare come again, they won't be able to leave. Scram. Qin Hao froze in his seat, his expression extremely stiff. This Slayers was really strong. Not only was he strong, but he was also bold. At least in Qin Hao's impression, no Divine King or Divine King had ever dared to treat Divine King Tian Zhao's soldiers like this, and even threaten them afterward. At this moment, Qin Hao felt a deep sense of respect for the Slayers. Although he did not know them, his good impression of the Slayers had multiplied. At the very least, he should be cheering for the Slayers in his heart. Good job killing them. Divine King Tian Zhao is not to be trifled with, especially Jun Mo. He will seek revenge for the smallest grievance, so he won't let it go so easily. Qin Hao was delighted, but he was also slightly worried for the slaughtering world. The High God is right. Not long after the Divine King Tian Zhao soldiers were killed, that bullshit Divine Prince came, and he even brought 3 Divine Masters with him. Dusk was extremely angry, and his mouth was dry from all the talking. He poured himself a cup of tea, gulped it down, and wiped the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. He stared at Qin Hao and said, What do you think the result was? What? Qin Hao sat in his seat and stretched his neck to meet Dusk's gaze. 1 against 3, and the Slayers killed 2. The other divine master spat out blood and dragged someone called Jun Mo. Yes, that arrogant guy. He escaped from our slaughtering world like a ghost, haha. Dusk held his stomach and laughed heartily. This was all transmitted by the heavenly Tao from the slaughtering world. It was unknown which faction's leader was talking about it, but their voices were quite loud. Although Dusk had not seen it with his own eyes, just hearing it made his blood boil. After all, the slaughtering world was the slaughtering world. No faction had ever dared to barge into the divine realm, including the ultimate divine king faction. Moreover, Jun Mo was still committing murder in the divine realm. In the end, he was chased by the slayers until he fled while wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. If it weren't for the fact that two divine masters had covered his retreat and the other divine master had run away quickly, Jun Mo might have really died in the slayer's hands. Boom! After Qin Hao heard Dusk God's words, huge waves rolled in his mind. He was so shocked that he wanted to cry. 1 against 3, and he killed 2. Although he did not know which of the 3 divine masters had died, they were still subordinates of divine King Tianzhao, and they were divine masters at that. This battle could be said to have broken into divine King Tianzhao's right-hand man. There was also Jun Mo. He would also have a day like this, where he would be killed until he fled screaming. 1 against 3, and the slayers were not divine masters, but they were able to kill divine masters. They were simply powerful. Taking 2 deep breaths, Qin Hao suppressed the excitement in his heart. After cultivating again for 4 lifetimes, his tolerance and adaptability far exceeded that of ordinary people. His mind was also very flexible, so he quickly figured out the crux of the matter. These slayers had the strength to kill divine masters. Although they were not divine masters, they could kill divine masters. Then, which level of power did this level belong to? Instantly, Qin Hao thought of one person, upper extremity. Although he is not a divine master, the slayer's cultivation might have reached upper extremity's level of power. Even if he is not upper extremity, he should be close. At the very least, they are on the same level. Qin Hao had not seen the upper extremity heavenly wheel's divine glyphs. During the battle in the infinite divine domain, Qin Hao had thought that upper extremity did not bother to activate the power of divine glyphs, so they did not appear. Now that he thought about the slayers, he realized that this was completely different from what he had imagined. The strongest divine master under divine, King Tianzhao, upper extremity, might not have any divine glyphs at all. In other words, his heavenly wheel was formed from divine glyphs. Desolation intent. No wonder. Qin Hao's calm heart began to stir again. No wonder the slayers could kill 2 divine masters. After comprehending the desolation divine path, they were infinitely close to divine king. At this moment, Qin Hao finally understood why the reincarnation mirror had brought him here. The massacre world's waters were very deep, and they were very strong. From the fact that the slayers did not fear divine King Tianzhao's orders, it was clear that the massacre world had a terrifying foundation. They might even have the qualifications to challenge divine kings. In that case, just how strong was the Azura? He was probably on the same level as Moon Shintian. At the very least, upper extremity would not be able to gain any advantage over Shura. In that case, it was relatively safe for Qin Hao to stay in the slaughter world. Haha, upper extremity, you should be very happy after hearing this little god's words. At least, our massacre world has collected a portion of the blood debt for the sword world. The Wu god's expression darkened. Chapter 2158. Translator. Nioibo Studio Editor. Nioibo Studio, a stream of divine Tao light flew toward the massacre dominion. Apart from Qin Hao and Huoshun, he also brought Ruo Ling and Salo to the dominion to see the world and worship the Azura Divine Lord. Ruo Ling and Salo had improved tremendously during the 100 years Qin Hao had been in seclusion. Now that the Wu god had taken control of the plane and received the help of the heavenly Tao, both of them had reached the unblemished Great Emperor realm. Ruo Ling, in particular, was only 1 step away from nirvana. The Dominion was the supreme holy land of the massacre world. The tribulation of Fire Beacon had given them a rare opportunity. Hua Shun, Ruo Ling, and Salo were going there for the first time, so they didn't want to miss it. Usually, if the Divine Lord didn't summon them, the plain rulers wouldn't be able to enter the Dominion. If they missed this opportunity, they would have to wait for another tribulation of Fire Beacon. The gap in between was close to 1,000 years. Ruo Chu, you must be careful when you worship the Divine Lord this time. Do you understand? Hua Shun put his hands behind his back and walked forward. His divine power turned into a barrier of light that enveloped everyone. Yes, Master. Qin Hao pretended to be respectful, but he was secretly clenching his fists and gritting his teeth. Hua Shun was blatantly taking advantage of him. Even if he was unwilling, he could only do as he was told. Hua Shun smiled and exclaimed in his heart. Although it was fake, it still felt good to be the teacher of Qin Hao, a great god who had cultivated for 30,000 years. Of course, he wouldn't forget Qin Hao's kindness. Without Qin Hao, he would have long been reduced to dust under the control of Fork God and perished in this chaotic world. However, he didn't expect Qin Hao to be a sword cultivator from the sword world and provoke the overlord of the wilderness, God King Tianzhao. The massacre world and the sword world were separated by a great distance. Even though Hua Shun was just a minor god, the disturbance in the infinite dominion had slowly spread to the massacre world over the past 100 years. Moreover, when he thought about how Jun Mo had brought 3 divine masters into the massacre dominion and fought a fierce battle with the Slayers, it was enough for the sea god to understand many things. He wouldn't tell on Qin Hao. Qin Hao's request was very small. All he wanted was to safely cross Qin Hao. That was all. Hua Shun's world. Hua Shun. Shun. Hua Shun was willing. Hua Shun's mind. Hua Shun's a course. Hua Shun was Hua Shun Hua Shun Hua Shun Hua. Hua Shun. Hua Shun Hua Shun. Hua Shun was Hua and Shun was Hua of Hua of Hua Shun. Studio from Hua Shun's Hua Shun. In addition, the Wu god needed to give Qin Hao a reasonable identity. Since the Slayer had ordered him to create a new Tianlin, then the disciple he had secretly trained, Ruo Chu, would definitely satisfy the Slayer. She had new facial features and long black hair. She was a cultivator born and bred in the world of slaughter. She was the proud disciple of the sea god, Ruo Chu. Even her name was similar to Ruo Ling's. It could be seen how much the sea god loved this disciple of his. At this moment, Ruo Ling was looking at Qin Hao with a strange expression. Because his memories had been erased, to her and Salo, Qin Hao was now a completely new person. Moreover, he was a family member of the same bloodline. After all, they were all from the Ruo generation. Ruo Ling and Salo were still unable to get used to this eldest senior brother, who had appeared out of nowhere. In the sea god's words, this was a disciple he had secretly raised, a hidden trump card he had reserved to deal with the cult master of sin. Although they could not get used to it in a short time, Ruo Ling and Salo still silently accepted Qin Hao. Moreover, along the way, they were especially respectful of Qin Hao, and there was even a trace of fear. Eldest senior brother, you're really amazing. You followed Master's footsteps to ascend to godhood. Do you have some secret to cultivation? Salo asked sincerely with the attitude of an honored realm cultivator. Cough, cough, you'll have to ask. Master. Qin Hao's figure was straight as a ramrod, and the aura of an eldest senior brother could be seen at a glance. Since the sea god had taken advantage of him, he could only take it back from his disciple and precious daughter. Ruo Ling poked Salo with her elbow and quickly gave him a few glances. As if noticing the small movements behind him, the sea god turned around and said with a serious face, Master leads the way, but cultivation depends on the individual. There's no secret to it. Your eldest senior brother ascended quickly because he cultivated diligently and had extraordinary comprehension. He's not as stupid and mediocre as you two. See, I told you. Ruo Ling sighed dejectedly. What kind of secret could they get from their eldest senior brother? Even if their father gave them special treatment, they definitely wouldn't be able to get it. Favoring boys over girls, how biased. Actually, Master is right. The path of Emperor focuses on comprehension and mental state, and the path of godhood is the same. You don't have to envy me. There's no need for you to envy me. Once your mental state reaches a certain level, you'll naturally succeed. Qin Hao carelessly rubbed Ruo Ling's hair. Ruo Ling resisted in her heart, but due to Qin Hao's status as eldest senior brother, she could only hold back her grievances and raise her head to smile foolishly, as if everything her eldest senior brother said was right. In addition, during this trip to the Divine Realm, we'll encounter many large races from different planes. There's no lack of monstrous geniuses with extremely strong cultivations. You all should be well-behaved and don't provoke others, the sea god warned. Compared to the rulers of other planes, his cultivation was actually very low. Although the sea god didn't know the situation of the other heavenly Tao's fire beacon tribulations, he assumed that they were definitely stronger than him. Regardless of whether it was the number of heavenly wheels or cultivation, they surpassed their plane. The sea god couldn't be blamed for this, but rather the previous ruler, the fork god. If it wasn't for the fork race being too selfish and suppressing the divine tribulation, their heavenly Tao would have at least 4 or even 5 gods. They would definitely be more courageous when facing other planes. Qin Hao opened his arms and patted Ruo Ling and Salo's shoulders at the same time. Listen to teacher. The sea god was right. In the past, when the Sword Conference was held in the seamless Divine Realm, there were many large races from different planes and countless gods. Many of them were outstanding juniors. There were differences in cultivation in the Divine Realm, but there wasn't much difference in the ways of the world. Therefore, on this trip to the Slaughter Divine Realm, they would definitely encounter many slaughter cultivators. By the way, teacher, do you know what the Divine Lord's so-called trial is? Qin Hao asked. What he was more concerned about was the sentence that the Slayer had said to the sea god before leaving. If I can't nurture a new heavenly wheel, I'll use you as a trial. At that time, the sea god was so scared that he couldn't calm down, so he didn't pay attention to it all. After Qin Hao came out of seclusion, the sea god grabbed an image from the heavenly Tao and replayed it. What was a trial? These 2 words made Qin Hao wary, and he faintly felt that something wasn't right. Take a god. Trial? However, the Wu god shook his head and said, after each cycle of flame and beacon, there should be a large number of newly ascended heavenly wheels in the god realm. However, from the past, it seems that after the newly ascended heavenly wheels went to the realm of the gods, they all disappeared. In short, be careful. When the sea god said these words, he stared at Qin Hao. The trial might be dangerous, but Qin Hao's hidden identity was very special. Therefore, after going to the Divine Realm, he should be extra careful. Yes. Qin Hao nodded slightly. He would take it one step at a time. If he didn't go to the Divine Realm to meet the Divine Lord, the new heavenly wheels wouldn't be able to freely travel through the entire Divine Realm. They would definitely be caught by the enforcers of the Divine Realm. All of this needed to be decided after going to the Divine Realm's trial. Chapter 2159. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. At first sight, the cycle of fire and beacon was never-ending. Since the beginning of the world and the formation of the God Realm, the 500 years of fire and beacon had become an iron-blooded tradition to cleanse the great Tao of slaughter. But what was God, Lord Azura's goal? No one knew the reason behind it. From the records of the previous calamities of fire and beacon, all the rulers knew that once a newly ascended heavenly wheel expert went to the God Realm, they would never return. What did those newly ascended heavenly wheel experts experience? Were they alive or dead? No one knew the answer. The God Realm of slaughter governed hundreds of continents, big and small. They only followed God, Lord Azura's will and silently endured, cleansed, and disappeared. At this time, Qin Hao and the others continued forward. Along the way, they met many newly ascended heavenly wheel experts led by other rulers. The number of people varied, but they were all like them, heading in the same direction to the God Realm of slaughter. The people of the Slaughter Realm were cold and cruel. Even if they met each other, they would not greet each other. Now that they were in the wilderness, Qin Hao looked around the Slaughter Realm. As far as the eye could see, the stars and planes of different sizes flickered with light of different strengths. The area was extremely vast. On the whole, although the Slaughter Realm wasn't as vast as the Great Dao Sword Realm, in comparison, the Seamless Realm, the Terra Realm, and the True Dragon Sword Realm weren't as vast as the Slaughter Realm. It was like comparing a weak youth to a muscular man. There are close to 400 planes of different sizes, but the Seamless World is less than 200. Even the most vast Rikugenji is only slightly more than 200. Qin Hao was secretly shocked. No wonder the Slaughter Realm had such a strong foundation. Regardless of how strong God Lord Azuro was, the Slayer was able to fight one against 3 God Lords and not be at a disadvantage. He killed 2, and the last one picked up Junemo and fled in a sorry state. Only such a vast realm of the gods could produce a transcendent like the Slayer. Qin Hao knew that the Sword Realm of the Great Path had been severely damaged. Its previous incarnation was only a small part of the Sword God King's sword will. Even so, the light that enveloped the Massacre Divine Realm was still shocking. Qin Hao secretly channeled his divine power. In the depths of his eyes, mottled patterns appeared. The Red Lotus divine power was crippled, but his eyes were the condensation of all the spirits of the perfected heavenly path, so they were not affected. When he channeled his divine power, he could still see through the illusions of the world. However, deep within Qin Hao's eyes were no longer flickering with faint flames. Instead, there were deep black lines, just like when the Slayer released the Sky Wheel. His eyes gradually lost the whites of his eyes, and his eyeballs eventually turned black like an abyss. At this time, Qin Hao focused his vision to observe. Through the boundless slaughter world, he could faintly see the God world even further away. Behind the Slaughter Realm, there were 2 large areas that were especially obvious. One of them was gray, giving off an illusory feeling. The other was earthy yellow. Even though they were separated by the Slaughter Realm, Qin Hao could still feel traces of the aura of death. One could imagine how strong the aura of death would be after stepping into the earthy yellow God world. Those 2 God worlds should be the Nether Devil world and the Yellow Springs world. Qin Hao secretly remembered the general direction. Reincarnation Old Man had told him that after passing through the Slaughter Realm, the Yellow Springs world, and the Nether Devil world, he would reach a magical place. Over there, even the Divine Kings would not be able to do anything to him. With the help of the reincarnation ritual ground and more than 100 years of cultivation, Qin Hao's Sky Wheel had 2 more patterns. Then, after arriving at that unknown place, Qin Hao would be able to completely open himself up and cultivate in peace. If 1,000 years was not enough, then 2,000 years, 3,000 years. Just like what Reincarnation Old Man had said, he had to at least reach the upper level of the Divine Tao. Then he would have the chance to escape from the hands of the Divine Kings. If he did not have enough backing, he could make up for it with time. As long as he stayed in the reincarnation ritual ground and cultivated endlessly, he believed that one day he would be able to avenge the Sword World. Father, look at those people. Their aura seems to be completely different from the massacre path that we cultivate. Ruo Ling pointed in a certain direction. Qin Hao came back to his senses and looked over. Not far away, there was an extremely turbulent divine aura that was running side by side with them. Through the divine aura, it was just as Ruo Ling had said. Qin Hao discovered that the aura of the heavenly wheel elite in the divine aura was indeed not ordinary. The sage's book had recorded the benevolent killing path, bloody massacre path, stop killing path, and extreme killing path. Qin Hao and the Wu God had discussed many of these in private. After all, he had to play the role of a real killer. However, Qin Hao could not feel the massacre path intent recorded in the sage's book at all from those people. Ignore them. The Wu God also secretly glanced over and frowned slightly. It seemed that he had not seen the massacre path on those people either. What are you looking at? A rude rebuke was heard. through the flying divine light. An extremely tall, black-robed cultivator could be vaguely seen yelling at Ruo Ling. "What's wrong with looking at you?" Ruo Ling's beautiful eyes widened slightly. "Can't I even look at you?" "Don't argue with them." The Wu god transmitted his voice and steered the divine light away from the turbulent light, not far away. Hee hee. The black-robed killer in the divine light let out a strange, bloodthirsty laugh. He grabbed at the void, and the divine will in his palm erupted, twisting the turbulence and forming a destructive vortex that engulfed the Wu god. "Be careful," Salo said in alarm. The Wu god glanced at the assassin in black and snorted coldly. He waved his sleeve and sent out a beam of divine light of slaughter. It slashed forward like a divine blade and destroyed the vortex of destruction descending from the sky. Not bad. The black-robed slaughterer,'s eyes were filled with excitement. With a boom, he took a step forward and actually pierced through that beam of divine light. At the same time he released his Tianlun, he threw out a punch that produced an extremely terrifying beast shadow. "What is the meaning of this?" the Wu god asked. As he moved his palms, the heavenly wheel on his body snaked, and the divine will of massacre gathered into a huge palm that slammed toward his opponent. Bang! Violent shock waves spread out as the fist and the palm collided. The beast shadow was extremely violent, dispersing the Wu god's palm and instantly falling on top of everyone's heads. The Wu god's expression changed. Clearly, his opponent was stronger than him. Qin Hao raised his head slightly. Just as the beast shadow pounced on him, he habitually loosened his sword fingers. As he raised his hand, thick black particles surged around Qin Hao. The killing intent in the air increased dramatically. An extreme chill spread out and formed a black spear. Swoosh! The spear pierced through the air and pierced the beast's shadow, penetrating its entire head from the jaw. The falling beast shadow immediately collapsed with a sad cry and turned into dust that was swept away by the turbulence. At the same time, the black-robed killer, who had blasted out the beast shadow not far away, suddenly let out a cry of pain. The heavenly wheel on his body dimmed a little, and he looked at Qin Hao with intense anger in his eyes. Buzz! Buzz! Immediately, the two balls of divine light that were moving side by side stopped at the same time and looked at each other. "Young man, your divine power is very strong." An old man walked up to the black-robed killer and patted him on the shoulder, indicating that he should not act rashly. Qin Hao had broken the bloodline divine technique of the God clan with a single strike. The strength of his divine power was not to be underestimated. "I just cast my heavenly will not long ago. Compared to my teacher, it's nothing," Qin Hao said coldly to the old man. The people of the world of massacre were all expressionless. The colder you appeared, the more powerful you seemed. But when the Wu god heard this, he couldn't help but feel ashamed. He thought to himself that the supreme god was still a supreme god. Even if he had lost 2 strands of divine power and sealed 2 divine glyphs, he was still so strong. "Haha, young man, you are too modest," the old man said coldly and mockingly. Anyone could see that Qin Hao's divine power was stronger than the Wu god's. "Teacher?" It wasn't certain who was whose teacher. "Old senior, the divine lord has ordered us to go to the deity realm for an audience. You attacked without saying anything." "Why?" Qin Hao asked. "Who told that girl to look at me?" the black-robed young man next to the old man shouted. He hated it when people looked at him. Ruo Ling was speechless. It was normal for the people of the world of massacre to have bad tempers. No one else could have such a bad temper. "What are you looking at? Why are you looking at him? Is he handsome?" The Wu god glared at Ruo Ling. "Didn't you look at him just now?" Ruo Ling was not convinced. "You stinking girl." The Wu god was angry as soon as he came down. Cough, cough. Qin Hao cleared his throat and said to the old man, "I have never liked to talk nonsense with people. Now that I have seen him, what do you want to do?" "Since you say so, then let's exchange some pointers." The old man's eyes were gloomy. Chapter 2160. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation in the Turbulence. Qin Hao confronted the old man. Ruo Ling was killed by the young man in black. Now, they were blocking the way to the deity plane. The elder stared at Qin Hao with his deep eyes. The murderous intent on his body grew stronger and stronger. This young man had broken the bloodline divine technique of the Eclipse clan with one move. His strength was evident, which made the elder wary. The old man was not afraid of Qin Hao, but the juniors he brought with him were not Qin Hao's match. It was better to get rid of them as soon as possible so that they would not be an obstacle to the juniors of the Eclipse clan. The reason to kill Qin Hao was that simple. At this moment, as the old man uttered the word spar, many figures surrounded Qin Hao and the Wu god. Including the old man, there were 5 Heaven-Luan realm cultivators on the other side. Since the deity wants us to go to the deity plane, we should take the deity's order as our priority. Why don't we spar after we reach the deity plane? Qin Hao looked around. Other than the old man, the other 4 were very weak, with less than 10,000 years of cultivation. The old man had 2 divine glyphs at the edge of his wheel of light. He should be a ruler of a certain plane. A one-on-one spar would be fine, but judging from the other side's posture, they were preparing to launch a group attack. 5 Heaven-Luan realm cultivators against 2, and the old man had 20,000 years of cultivation. This was not a fair fight. Even if Qin Hao was not afraid, he had to consider Ruo Ling and Salo. It will be the same sooner or later. Once you reach the deity plane, your fate is sealed. You will understand sooner or later. The old man approached Qin Hao with a sullen face. His skinny palm emitted a cold, murderous intent, which had condensed into a solid gas. From his tone, it seemed that he knew a lot about the deity plane. Senior, can you bear the consequences of delaying the deity master's order? Qin Hao asked sharply. The old man's footsteps paused slightly. He laughed hoarsely and said, "It's okay. The deity master won't mind, even if you are absent." That's not necessarily true. Whoosh! A beam of light came from behind and accidentally broke into the space between Qin Hao and the old man. It turned into a young man in white and said to the old man, "The divine decree is the divine decree. The fate of the people in the lower worlds is decided by the divine Lord. It is not up to an old man like you to decide." The old man's movement stiffened. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the other party. "Who are you? You want to stand out? Hey, don't bully me just because you have more people." The white-clothed youth made a fearful gesture. We are bullying you with numbers. What do you do about it?" The black-clothed youth who had attacked earlier rubbed his fists so hard that crackling sounds could be heard. He wasn't afraid of breaking bones. "So that's how it is. All right, then. Actually, I have quite a number of people as well." The young man in white let out a sigh of relief. All of a sudden, a loud whistling sound was heard. Beams of dazzling divine light came from behind, shuttling back and forth like a torrential rain. In the middle of the most turbulent divine light, a square-faced, brawny man roared, his voice shaking the chaotic flow of the untainted land and reverberating in the old man's ears like a thunderclap. The Gatch clan from the Massacre world would like to challenge the Eclipse clan. Buzz. The overwhelming killing aura descended frequently. When the old man looked up, his facial features were distorted in horror. Without saying a word, he abandoned the 4 juniors and turned to run, disappearing in the direction of the Massacre divine realm. "God Ancestor, wait for us." The black-clothed youth's heart twitched violently. The 4 of them immediately turned into light and fled, ignoring Qin Hao as if they had never appeared. The day the Eclipse clan was born, the elders of the clan used a secret method to change their fate souls. The sealed bee soul was refined into the baby's body and turned into an acquired soul. The white-clothed youth stood beside Qin Hao, looking at the old man and the 4 youths who had fled. Acquired soul gathering. No wonder Qin Hao felt a trace of abnormality. This was the beast-snatching path. The beast-snatching path entered the massacre path through the beast-snatching path and became an extremely special beast-slaying path. When in battle, The Eclipse clan will display completely different abilities according to the different types of beast souls. In particular, the beast-slaying path accumulated a huge amount of resentment before its death. Therefore, their killing intent is very fierce, the white-clothed youth said. The beast-slaying path could be seen as a small branch of the bloody massacre path. The price is very high, isn't it? Qin Hao said quietly. Of course. Almost none of the babies survive. The white-clothed youth looked at Qin Hao. The Eclipse clan's beast-slaying path was extremely cruel. First of all, it was difficult to hunt hundreds of beasts, especially powerful divine beasts. In order to reduce the difficulty, most of them chose to steal divine beasts' babies and refine them. Then, they would plant the beast soul into the life soul of the Eclipse clan's baby and merge the two into one. Simply put, high risk and high reward. Once they succeeded, the Eclipse clan's descendants would be much stronger than the average divine path cultivator. Even if they encountered the demons carefully cultivated in other planes, they would not necessarily be too bad. Why are you telling me so much? Are we close? Qin Hao glanced at the white-clothed youth, then left with the Wu Shun and the others on a divine light. Preposterous. The white-clothed young man drew circles on Qin Hao's back as he muttered some incomprehensible curses. Young Master Kong, who are those people? The square-faced middle-aged man asked. How would I know? Am I close to him? Jia Kong, the young master of the Gach clan, swept the middle-aged man's sleeve, then stepped forward and flew toward the divinity zone. The square-faced middle-aged man scratched his head. If he was not close, why would he help him? It was strange that a kind freak like young master Jia Kong appeared in the slaughter world. Let's continue. With a shout, the middle-aged man led the Gach clan team and followed young Master Jia Kong, keeping a subtle distance. The team of nearly 50 Tian Luan realm cultivators marched toward the divinity zone. Do you know anything about the Gach clan? Qin Hao looked back and glanced at the divine light behind him. Seeing the 50 Tian Luan realm cultivators behind the divine light, he could not help but feel his scalp tingle. The Wu Shun shook his head. I know almost nothing about the major clans of the slaughter world, but looking at the lineup, the Gach clan should be very strong. The Gene God had lived for more than 100 years. How much could he know? The Wu Shun should have known more, but unfortunately, he was dead. But judging from the 50 Tian Luan realm cultivators accompanying them, the Gach clan's strength was beyond imagination. Under the fire beacon calamity, 50 Tian Luan realm cultivators, what kind of concept was that? If the young man in white had not introduced himself, the Wu Shun would have thought that they were the direct troops of the Azure God. That guy in white seems to be a good person. At least I didn't look at him and he wanted to kill, Ruo Ling said. One could not judge a person by their lineup. A strong lineup was not necessarily bad. Cover your eyes. Qin Hao rolled his eyes at Ruo Ling. The sin-refining cult killed people without saying a word. Did they not have any memory? Princess for you. Salo heard Qin Hao's order and sensibly handed Ruo Ling a piece of cloth. You're lying to yourself. Ruo Ling gritted her teeth in anger. Primordial Alchemist will continue to be updated in the new book pavilion. There are no advertisements in the website. Please bookmark and recommend the new book pavilion. If you like Primordial Alchemist, please bookmark. Primordial Alchemist's new book pavilion updates the fastest. Chapter 2161. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation coming to the Divine Plane was different from what they had imagined. Before they reached the Azura Shrine, Qin Hao and the others were intercepted. They were not the only ones who were intercepted. More than 300 plane controllers, as well as the newly advanced Tianlun, were all blocked outside the Divine Plane. They could not even step on a land. They were intercepted in the void. In front of them stood a line. They were all dressed in blood-red clothes. There were not many of them, only 70 to 80. However, at the front of the line stood the supreme ruler of the massacre world, the Slayer, who was second only to Azura and above all gods. Without the slightest ripple of divine intent, just by standing there, the Slayer was like an impenetrable wall. The various forces that had come to meet him all stopped in their tracks, not daring to take even half a step forward, maintaining absolute respect. The Slayer looked forward calmly. At this moment, the void was filled with figures. After some time, his divine will could no longer sense the divine path auras coming from outside the divine plane. Finally, the Slayer opened his mouth and spat out. "You may leave. Go, go." The figures looked at each other. What did the Slayer mean? Who should go? Where should they go? The newly advanced Tianluan of the Fire Beacon Calamity stay. All plane controllers, return immediately and look after the God Realm for the Divine Master. One of the blood-red figures standing behind the Slayer took half a step forward and gave the order for the Slayer. As soon as he said this, the void was in an uproar. All the plane controllers left behind the newly advanced Tianlun and returned immediately. Father, we haven't reached the divine plane yet. We haven't even seen Divine Master Azura. Are we going to go back just like that? Ruo Ling tugged at the Wu God's clothes. They had crossed the eldritch wilderness and traveled an unknown distance. They could not enter the divine plane. Not only was it regrettable, but it was also a loss. Ruo Ling was not the only one who did not understand. Many of the younger generation who came with the plane controllers did not understand either. Phew! The Wu God breathed a sigh of relief. His already heavy heart became heavier. He said to Qin Hao, "Ruo Chu, I can't accompany you anymore. You have to rely on yourself. Be careful. Be careful. Be careful. Be careful." They had thought that the Divine Master would summon them at the Azura Palace. Slayer. Slayer. Although the Titanic Sea God did not have to explain Qin Hao's identity and allowed him to blend into the crowd, no matter what happened next, the Titanic Sea God could not help him even if it wanted to. "Teacher, have." Qin Hao bowed slightly to the sea deity. Although they were master and disciple in name, his gratitude was real. The sea deity had brought him to the core of the slaughter world. Now, it could only depend on himself. The Wu God nodded. He wanted to give his blessings, but found that words of encouragement were useless. He patted Qin Hao's shoulder and pulled Ruo Ling and Salo away. "We obey the Divine Master." The plane controllers gathered. After bidding farewell to their juniors, they bowed to the Slayer in unison. "Go. Maintain the operation of the heavenly path. Welcome the next fire beacon 500 years later." The Slayer waved at the heavenly path controllers, indicating for them to leave. "Farewell, Slayer." The leaders bowed again, and then scattered in all directions, turning into beams of light and returning to the plane in the direction they had come from. "Eldest senior brother, do your best." Before Ruo Ling left, she turned back and waved at Qin Hao with clenched fists. In the cold world of slaughter, this cheer was especially refreshing. It attracted many people's attention. "Junior brother, junior sister, take good care of Master for me," Qin Hao replied. Although their memories had been erased, they could still feel the warmth of friendship from Ruo Ling and Sorrow. Soon, the plane master who had rushed to the divine realm left. Only the newly ascended Tianlin, who was in the midst of the tribulation of Fire Beacon, as well as the Slayer and the group of red-robed cultivators behind him, remained in the vast void. "Hey, it's going to be dangerous. You came here alone. You don't even have anyone to take care of. You're a little pitiful." Qin Hao turned and saw a young man in white approaching. It was the young master of the Gach clan, Jia Kong, who had helped him along the way. "Do you know what's going to happen next?" Qin Hao asked softly. Jia Kong shook his head and said seriously, "I don't know. But every new Tianluan of the Gach clan goes to the divine realm and never returns. A long time ago, my grandfather's grandfather had a dream. In the dream, he saw his grandfather's 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 grandfather, my grandfather's 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 grandfather. Wait. Can you call the grandfather's grandfather's grandfather your ancestor?" Qin Hao felt a headache coming. "Yes, my ancestor told my grandfather's grandfather in the dream. He said that once we enter the divine realm, all races will wither. If we want to live, we have to kill the redcoats," Jia Kong said. He couldn't understand the meaning of the ancestor of the Gach clan, including his dreaming grandfather. However, in the divine path, The divine intent was strong enough to transmit the divine intent back to the hometown from far away across the vast, untainted land. Although the Gach clan didn't understand at that time. According to the situation in front of him, Jia Kong could vaguely understand the meaning of the ancestor in his dream. Jia Kong didn't know what would happen next. He only knew that if he wanted to avoid the tragedy of all races, he had to start with the group of red-robed cultivators behind the Slayer. If you want to live, you have to kill the redcoats. Qin Hao thought about Jia Kang's words. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the group of red-robed cultivators. The Gach clan rules several realms and has formed an alliance. I'm not bragging. Our overall strength is very strong. You should know by looking at the Tianluan cultivators behind me. They are new Tianluan cultivators in this tribulation of fire beacon like me. They are also my followers. If you don't have anyone to rely on, why don't you follow me? Jia Kong said to Qin Hao. Qin Hao glanced at Jia Kong and quickly moved his face away. His expression was cold. I saw that you were alone, so I took care of you out of kindness. I don't have any ulterior motives. Jia Kong could see that Qin Hao didn't trust him. He pointed in several directions and said, "Look over there. The Gao Tong clan, Hung Chuan clan, and Zhonghua clan of the Massacre World are secretly contacting other new Tianluan cultivators. They are preparing to form an alliance, including the Eclipse clan you met earlier. If you don't follow me, you'll be in danger." The Gach clan was indeed the leader of a large clan alliance in the Massacre World. Because of this, the number of Tianluan cultivators behind Jia Kong was shocking. However, the Gach clan was not the only large god clan in the Massacre World. The Gaotong clan, Hung Chuan clan, and Zhonghua clan were not weak. Jia Kang's ancestor was the first god to enter the divine domain. Since they could receive Jia Kang's message in their dreams, the Gaotong clan, Hung Chuan clan, and Zhonghua clan probably knew some secrets about the divine domain. Therefore, they had begun to form factions to form a new sky wheel army to break through the unknown predicament. Jia Kong saw that Qin Hao had broken the Eclipse clan's bloodline divine technique with one move. His cultivation was not ordinary, and he was alone, so he pulled Qin Hao along. He definitely didn't have the intention to deceive Qin Hao. At this time, Qin Hao looked around and found that it was as Jia Kong said. Imperceptibly, the large clans of the Massacre World had begun to form groups and were trying their best to strengthen their troops. As far as the eye could see, there were more than 2,000 newly promoted Tianluan cultivators in more than 300 planes. Among them, the large clans had the most Tianluan cultivators. It was rare to see someone like Qin Hao who was alone. No, Qin Hao transmitted his voice to Jia Kong, declining his good intentions. If it was really as Jia Kong said, there would be a terrifying danger, then forming a group would be safe. In Qin Hao's opinion, forming a group would be a bigger target. Maybe the first group to be attacked would be the group with the largest number. Moreover, Qin Hao was originally planning to fish in troubled waters and sneak into the Massacre World. If he joined forces with Jia Kong, it would be more troublesome. You really don't know what's good for you. Forget it. The Massacre World has always been like this. Jia Kong saw that Qin Hao's expression was as cold as ice, so he didn't try to persuade him and left silently. There was a limit to his kindness. I'm sure you must be very curious as to why the Tianluan cultivators of the previous Fire Beacon cultivators would mysteriously disappear once they reached the core divine territory and never appear again. The Slayer saw the small movements of the various god clans and sneered in his heart. At the same time, he continued to say, "There is a rumor in the Massacre World that the newly promoted Tianluan cultivators all die when they reach the divine territory. In fact, this is not the case. Please enlighten me, Slayer." Jia Kong mustered up his courage and stepped forward. He bowed and saluted. Seeing his actions, the densely packed, newly promoted Tianluan cultivators in the void all broke out in cold sweat. "Oh, little brat from the Gach clan." The Slayer recognized Jia Kang's clan from his aura and said, "I'm sure the ruler of the Gach Plain must have received a secret message from your ancestor. Don't worry, I won't punish you. In fact, not only the Gach clan, but also the High Vine clan, the Hunchuan clan, the Firemount clan, and all the other god clans should have received the message more or less. Then let me tell you clearly, you may not die when you reach the divine territory, including your ancestor. Everything depends on your luck. Now, you only have one goal, which is to do everything you can to reach the Azura Palace alive. The moment you step into the Azura Palace, you will understand everything. You may even be lucky enough to meet the first god ancestor of your family. The Slayer stopped talking and smiled at the more than 2,000 newly promoted Tianluan cultivators in front of him. He said, "Now, the game is about to begin. Are you all ready?" Chapter 2162. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. He had to think of every possible way and use all his strength to reach the Azura Palace alive. Then, the truth behind the 500 years of war in the slaughter world would be revealed. Wong, wong, wong. Balls of powerful wheel light erupted from the front, and the surging divine will of slaughter swept through the world like a raging cold wind, including Qin Hao, the space where the 2,000 new heavenly wheel experts were. It seemed to be frozen in an instant. The bone-chilling killing intent seemed to freeze their souls into ice cubes. Qin Hao stared at it, and his heart tightened. Behind the Slayer, there was a row of red-robed cultivators. All of them had celestial great heaven wheels, and each of them had 2 divine veins. The surging killing intent was especially strong. Even Qin Hao felt a strong sense of death in the face of such a terrifying team. The game was about to begin. This was a game of hunting and being hunted. After 500 years of war, the new Heaven Wheel experts could only escape the pursuit of the red-robed cultivators with 2 divine veins and enter the Azura Palace alive. Only then would the hunt end. Gulp. The sound of someone swallowing their saliva came from an unknown direction. More than 2,000 newly ascended Heavenly Wheel experts trembled violently. They looked at each other, and fear emerged in their eyes. Go! Escape! No one knew who made the first move, but a figure madly activated Heaven's Wheel, shuttling past the Slayer and the group of red-robed powerhouses, heading towards the divine region below. Soon, they disappeared into the dusky world. Boom! In the next moment, the 2,000 people rushed together, activating all the heaven wheels to the extreme. Perhaps many of them did not know what cultivation and divine veins represented, but the suffocating aura of the red robe cultivators made everyone feel the pressure and danger. They knew that they were no match for the red robe cultivators, and could only run as fast as they could. Just like the Slayer said, they had to use all the means and power to reach the Azura Palace alive. 1, 2, 3. The Slayer counted silently, and the red-robed cultivators behind him stood coldly. They did not even turn around and let the divine light pass in front of them, as if they were waiting for something. 4, 5, 6. The Slayer was still counting, and the smile on his face became wider and wider. Qin Hao did not move either. He clenched his fists and stood in place. He did not rush to the divine realm with the new Heaven Wheel experts. At this time, his heart was beating violently, and more sweat appeared on his face. However, he kept waiting, and he knew that the one who ran at this time would not have a good result. 7, 8. The Slayer's gaze seemed to have noticed Qin Hao. Apart from Qin Hao, there were a few new Heaven Wheel experts who did not move. The Slayer. There. The Slayer. The Slayer was translation. There were a Lucas. You're quite clever. The Slayer smiled and continued to count. Not in. The hunt begins. Boom. After 10 breaths, a row of red-robed Heaven Wheel experts stood quietly. Their figures were so fast that they were distorted. They did not move, but when they moved, it was earth-shattering. Their collective power almost turned this space into dust. Immediately, Qin Hao saw red shadows chasing after the newly minted Tianluan cultivators who had fled earlier. Each of them was unbelievably fast. Under the gaze of the eye of all spirits, he saw that the most prominent newly minted Tianluan cultivator was directly penetrated by a beam of red divine light. With a blood-curdling scream, the man-wheel light was shattered, and his spiritual soul was destroyed by the precepts. Bang, bang, bang. Countless terrible waves came crashing down. As the beams of red divine light fell, the teams formed by the members of the big clans who had gathered together were instantly broken. The wheel lights were shattered, and the bodies that had lost their breath kept falling. Often, the more groups the new Heaven Wheel experts gathered, the stronger the blow they suffered. Would they be safe if they stayed together? In the face of absolute strength, the group of new Heaven Wheel experts was useless. As Qin Hao had predicted, they were defeated in one blow. Go! The time had come. As the last redcoat left the Slayer's side and chased after the Sky Wheel team in front, Qin Hao did not hesitate anymore. Like a wild beast that had escaped its reins, he turned into a dark shadow and rushed into the vast divine realm. Just as Qin Hao moved, the few people who stayed here were not slow either. They moved almost at the same time. The Heaven Wheel team that had escaped earlier had attracted the attention of the red-robed experts. Every red-robed expert had hunted a target. Taking advantage of the precious and short opportunity, now was the most suitable time to escape. Then, it would depend on personal strength and little luck. Among the 2,000 people who could avoid the bloody hunt of all the red-robed experts and successfully reach the Azura Palace safely. But the situation seemed to be more serious than Qin Hao had imagined. In the escape, he saw the Gach clan, the Takutang clan, the Hunchuan clan, and so on. Among the members of the big clans of the Slaughter World, there were people who suddenly killed their companions. After killing their companions, those people who killed them immediately put on a blood-red robe and burst out with a divine light that was several times stronger than the others. They went to kill other targets. Qin Hao's heart thumped. Only now did he understand that the red-robed experts had already mixed in with the members of the big clans. No wonder. The Slayer was there, counting slowly. He was not worried at all, because he had already arranged for assassins. When the time came, they would suddenly attack those big clans. Chaos. The whole Slaughter World was in chaos. The sky was filled with shrill screams and terrifying red divine light. Every breath, there would be many new Heaven Wheel experts dying tragically. On one hand, they had to escape from the red-robed experts. On the other hand, they also had to guard against the people around them. Trust was useless at this time. The so-called group was not reliable at all. Gradually, including the young masters of the big clans like Jia Kong, they were all like panicked lambs. They did not trust anyone anymore. They just howled and ran like stray dogs. Haha, I wonder how many people in this world can make it to the Azura Palace alive. The Slayer slowly moved forward, using an elegant smile to appreciate the bloody scene in the distance. His gaze passed through the chaotic figures in the sky and finally fell on Qin Hao. The corner of his mouth curved, and his figure disappeared from this world. The Azura Palace. At the end of the ice-cold palace, there was a huge iron throne. Thick chains bound a tall body. In the dim light, it was impossible to see the person's face. His head was hanging to one side, and he breathed weakly. His two palms pressed weakly on the armrests of the iron throne. His eyes gradually flashed with a scarlet luster. In front of the ice-cold iron throne, the Slayer returned to the Azura's side. He waved his hand in front of him, and a ball of divine light appeared in the palace. From it, clear images appeared. These images were the scenes of the red-robed experts hunting down the new Heaven Wheel experts. Every scene was very tragic. In the end, the images stopped on a black-haired youth who had escaped to the Azura Palace. This black-haired youth was Qin Hao. Chapter 2163. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation King. The Slayer hummed respectfully, then moved away so that the Shura could see Qin Hao more clearly. More than 100 years ago, the Heavenly Edict army broke into the divine realm to hunt down a fugitive. After that, the Slayer learned that the fugitive was a sword cultivator from the Sword World. Because of this, the Slayer left the Shura Palace to investigate personally. Unfortunately, the Wu God dealt with it very cleanly. The Slayer did not find anything strange in the Heavenly Edict plane. However, this did not mean that the Wu God was successful. On the contrary, the Slayer was even more certain that the person from the Sword World that the Heavenly Edict army wanted to capture was there. This person's appearance is completely different from what Junimo said. The divine massacre intent on him is also very pure. Do you think that he is a fugitive from the Sword World? The Slayer could not make up his mind. However, in terms of aura, Qin Hao was exactly the same as the people from the Massacre World. His divine massacre intent was even purer than that of most new heavenly wheels. Roar! The chained figure on the huge iron throne did not respond for a long time. After a while, he let out a low growl mixed with doubt. The Slayer's face stiffened slightly. He nodded and said, "You are right. A perfect heavenly wheel can contain the power of the universe and cultivate the essence of the heavenly edict of the various divine realms. If he has been cultivating the Tao of Massacre in the past 100 years, he can indeed become a qualified cultivator of the Tao of Massacre." That being said, even the Slayer was shocked when he saw Qin Hao fleeing for his life and the pure aura of slaughter emanating from his body. Taking a step back, if Qin Hao was not from the Massacre World, then he could go from knowing nothing to being able to condense the divine power of the Massacre World in such a short time. Such talent could be said to be peerless. Even among the monsters with perfect heavenly wheels, it was rare. Suddenly, the Slayer had the thought of cherishing talent. It was a pity that Qin Hao was not from the Massacre World. Roar! However, at this moment, on the cold iron throne, a black divine light flew out from the dying figure and instantly flew out from the Azura Palace. "King, you are." The Slayer's face was filled with shock. He hurriedly took a few steps towards the Iron Throne. The Shura was already in such a state, yet he still wanted to separate a part of his divine soul. Crash! Amidst the sound of chains being dragged, the figure on the Iron Throne reached out a hand covered in old wounds towards the Slayer. There was not a single part of the skin on his palm that was intact. It was covered in cracks, preventing the Slayer from approaching him. The battle in the past had caused his condition to be unstable. He could erupt in an instant. Even if he was bound by the Netherworld King's divine iron, he could still be in danger if the Slayers approached. "All right," the Slayer stopped and sighed. "If you want to take a look, then go ahead. It's good that you can verify if he is the prophesied person of the Southern Heaven Buddhist realm's old monk. If so, that would naturally be a good thing. If not, Qin Hao's fate would be death." The Slaughter Realm did not welcome cultivators from other immortal realms, including sword cultivators from the Sword Realm. Moreover, Qin Hao had offended a divine, King Tian Zhao. At this moment, the Slayer's brows furrowed. He felt an extremely powerful divine will descend upon the Shura Palace. It was not just one, but many heavenly wheels auras. Junimo was here again. The lineup he brought was even stronger than 100 years ago. "Please rest first." The Slayer respectfully bowed to the Iron Throne. He turned around and walked out of the Shura Palace. Upper extremity. In the dim palace, the figure on the huge iron throne murmured these two words. The red light in his eyes became sharper. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dazzling figures descended from the void one after another. Every one of them was sacred and dazzling, like the soldiers of the divine court in a neat square formation. They might press down on the training field in front of the Azura Palace. At this moment, intense black flames erupted from the training field. Every flame condensed into a Shura guard, wielding a scimitar that resembled the Grim Reaper. They roared hoarsely at the brilliant heavenly decree battle formation in front of them. However, this time, the Shura guards did not dare to move recklessly like before. This was because in front of the phalanx of the Imperial Edict, divine soldiers stood there with his hands clasped behind his back. The divine might that surged out was as frightening as the Azura divine lord in the palace, and even more vast. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Ah! The number one divine lord expert under divine, King Tian Zhao, recognized as the number one person under the divine king in the Archean domain. "Why do you have the time to come to our Azura Palace?" The Slayer slowly walked out of the palace and stood at the top of the gray stone steps. He looked down at the dazzling formation of the divine soldiers. First, he looked at Shang-Chi, who was in front of the formation, and then he looked at Junimo. The Slayer said, "Divine Prince Junimo, it seems like you don't have a good memory." He had seriously warned Tianluan of the heavenly Zhao God domain that the next time he came, he would make sure that not even their bones would remain. "The upper extremity is here. Try touching me again." Junimo shouted at the top of the stone steps. He raised his arm, and a strong, godly light condensed into a long staff. He waved Sky Splitter, and the entire Azura mountain seemed to tremble under the power of the staff. Beside him, God Lord Fenway was also gnashing his teeth at the Slayer. The last time he was here, he had almost died at the hands of this person. But this time, he wanted to see if the divine servant of the Massacre World God Lord could defeat the divine lord who was ranked number 1 in the Archean domain. Between Azura's Slayer and Shang-Chi, who was stronger? "Do you really think I don't dare?" The Slayer's eyes darkened slightly. His hand turned into a claw, and the moment he raised it, the sky of the Massacre World suddenly turned dark. Endless cold, killing intent swept over, and with the power of heaven, it pressed down on the heavenly Zhao God domain's formation on the Azura field. "Your Excellency, please stop. This time, we are here to watch the Massacre World's Fire Beacon trial." Back in the Battle of Light region, Azura's divine soul was scattered by the Light King. It is said that he worked hard to make the world stronger, and he sent down fire beacons to the lower realms to cleanse the common people. "Ha! I want to see how far Azura has gone." Shang-Chi smiled and waved his hand. The dark night receded from his palm, and the falling power of heaven was blocked by a tyrannical desolate will, dissipating into nothingness. Then Junimo smiled. Seeing this scene, even if Shang-Chi and the Slayer hadn't fought seriously, it was still possible to determine who was stronger. Azura's divine servant was strong, but unfortunately, he was facing Shang-Chi. His divine Tao was still a level lower, and his maturity was still lacking. The Slayer's brows furrowed. He raised his hand, and the massacre divine intent was dispersed by a desolate will. This made him understand that he was still not strong enough to face the number 1 divine lord of the Archean domain. Impudent. Shang-Chi divine lord, as a guest, wants to see the results of my heavenly wheel trial. As the host, how can you be so rude? A rebuke rang out from the depths of Azura Palace, accompanied by light footsteps. Soon, a figure with a terrifying aura stepped out. King. The Slayer's face was filled with intense shock. His sparkling eyes looked at the dignified youth in light blue robes in front of him. His nose twitched, and tears welled up in his eyes. After so many years, today was the first time Azura had left his iron throne and stepped out of Azura Palace. This blue-robed youth was only a soul separated from Azura's main body. Chapter 2164. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. A pure cultivator of slaughter. Good, evil, wisdom, and stupidity. Love, hate, infatuation, and madness. Joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. The 7 emotions and 6 desires of the ancients, all contained in innate Tao spirits. Every desire and emotion could be cultivated into an independent Tao body. The world god of slaughter, Lord Azura, cultivated the 1,000 transformations Tao of slaughter, named mutual slaughter. The mutual slaughter Tao allowed him to split into many independent individuals, each of which had his own divine ability. However, due to their different personalities, the power of their divine abilities differed. For example, the Azura's root of kindness was benevolence, and he cultivated the Tao of slaughter. As long as there was a chance, he was willing to give an evil person a chance to turn over a new leaf. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not completely eliminate them. The evil form was filled with Azura's extreme evil, and it cultivated the Tao of slaughter. In the evil form's eyes, there was no other Tao, only slaughter. It possessed a pure, murderous nature. In the mutual slaughter Tao, the strength of each individual was different, but they did not affect each other and kept each other in check. In the end, Azura's true body was formed. When all the individuals were gathered, Azura's intelligence and strength would reach its peak. On the surface, he was a god of slaughter, but behind him was an army of thousands. Moreover, this god of slaughter also possessed the emotions of an ordinary person. In the Battle of the Light region, Azura's divine soul was scattered by the Light God King. It took a long time for him to recover his body. However, he was still missing a part of his soul, causing his state to be incomplete. Wisdom form. The Slayer looked at the youth in light blue robes in front of him and knew that he was only a form of Tao. Moreover, among all the forms of Azura, Wisdom form's aura was the most comforting. Its aura even surpassed that of the suppressed true form in the palace. Wisdom form smiled and nodded at the Slayer, patting his shoulder lightly. Slayer had worked hard all these years. After that, Azura, who had transformed into his wisdom form, walked down the stone steps step by step. His posture was exceptionally elegant as he stood in front of Shang-Chi. He glanced at Junimo and smiled. The Tian Zhao Divine Prince has brought Shang-Chi Divine Lord here to give me the honor of slaughtering the entire God Realm. If the two of you wish to see the results of my training, then please wait and see. Ji Xiang's eyes contained the light of wisdom, and his temperament was exceptionally gentle. This surprised Junimo, as he seemed to be different from the rumored Divine Lord of Massacre. Shang-Chi gently pressed his palm on Junmo's shoulder and transmitted his voice. This is one of the Azura's aspect Tao. It should be the aspect of wisdom. Your Highness, please don't act rashly. Shang-Chi had been in the divine path for a long time, so he naturally knew a little about the famous divine masters in the untainted land. Although the will of God from Ji Xiang was very weak, he was definitely no match for Shang-Chi. Furthermore, Azura's original body had been severely injured by the King of Light's Dharma. Under such circumstances, if Shang-Chi fought with Azura, he would have a great chance of winning. However, this was the slaughter world after all, and the other party had the advantage of the great Tao. Moreover, due to some special reason, the upper extremity was afraid of the Azura and did not dare to act rashly. It would be best if they could peacefully coexist and quietly observe the results of the trial. Cupping his hands, upper extreme Chao Ji Xiang said, "Thank you." Ji Xiang nodded and smiled. He raised his arm, and 3 chairs appeared in the middle of the Azura arena. "Please, Azura God is the God Master of the Slaughter World. Please go first," Shang-Chi said modestly. Immediately, the 3 of them took their seats and quietly waited for the results of the trial. At this moment, the Azura arena did not have any images of the newly ascended heavenly wheel experts. However, when their will of God radiated out, everything in the divine domain was naturally reflected in their minds. Those pairs of calm eyes seemed to be able to see everything that was happening outside Azura Peak. On this trip, Junimo still came for Qin Hao and the Mirror of Samsara. Considering the problem of his own safety, he brought Shang-Chi along. He only wanted to capture Qin Hao and did not want to make a strong enemy of the Slaughter World. Azura's thoughts were the same as Junmo's. He did not want to provoke Tian Zhao Deity King. He only wanted to see if the separated soul could detect the real situation of Qin Hao. If Qin Hao really had the opportunity that he was waiting for, even if he was not a Slaughter World god, but a fugitive from the Sword World, he would still protect him. After all, Qin Hao's life and death was related to whether Azura could recover. This was of utmost importance. If not, he would not hesitate to kill Qin Hao. There was no reason to keep an existence that was useless to the Slaughter World and had even brought disaster to himself. I wonder if the evil face of the God Master can detect the real face of that person. On the stone steps, Slayer gazed into the distance, thousands of miles away from Azura Peak. The black godly light that flew out from Azura Palace earlier contained a pure killing nature. That was the strongest form of the path of killing other than Azura's original form. Moreover, The evil face could be said to be the strongest in the slaughter world because Azura's original form was not complete. In the slaughter world, a game of hunting and being hunted was being played out in a bloody manner. After enduring 500 years of baptism by fire beacons, more than 2,000 newly ascended heavenly wheel experts had just stepped onto the land of the slaughter world when they were killed even more cruelly than the fire beacons. More than 150 red-clothed experts, all of them immortal-grade heavenly wheel experts with 20,000 years of cultivation. Any one of them was enough to compete with Lucio and Long Miao, the newly ascended heavenly wheel experts who had just stepped into the path of godhood faced such powerful opponents. It was easy to imagine their fates. In almost every breath, there would be figures falling from the sky. Their souls would be annihilated by the laws, and they would die tragically on the spot. Qin Hao shuttled through the sky, filled with killing. At this moment, he had already landed on a piece of scorched earth with rugged rocks. He was madly rushing toward the core of the slaughter world. There should be a restriction placed in the slaughter world. Although it did not affect the heavenly wheel's performance, flying in the sky consumed a lot of his godly power. The slaughter world was so vast that flying was not cost-effective. When Qin Hao landed, he looked in a certain direction. There was a newly ascended heavenly wheel expert who was being hunted by a red-clothed expert. Like him, the newly ascended heavenly wheel expert also fled to the land and quickly hid his divine aura. After landing, his running figure merged with the environment. It was very strange. It was as if he had turned into a stone on the scorched earth and turned into gravel in the soil. He disappeared without a trace in an instant. Even Qin Hao, who was good at hiding, could not help but be shocked when he saw this scene. He secretly praised. Unexpectedly, the red-clothed expert descended from the sky and slapped down with his palm. The palm light that contained the monstrous slaughter divine will destroy the area within a radius of 1,000 miles. It forcefully slapped the newly ascended heavenly wheel expert to death at the bottom. When Qin Hao heard the shrill scream from the red Dharma, his hair immediately stood on end. He immediately dispelled the idea of hiding his aura. His speed increased a lot, and he madly fled as if there was oil on the soles of his feet. Hiding my aura and merging with the environment of the Great Path won't work. The group of red-clothed experts brought by the Slayers were not to be trifled with. With such a group of hunters chasing after him, Qin Hao also instantly gave up the idea of fishing in troubled waters. The entire slaughter world was covered by the red divine shadow. It was impossible for him to sneak over. He could not avoid it, hide it, or hide it. At present, Qin Hao only had one way to protect himself, and that was to obediently listen to the Slayers and use all his strength to rush to the Azura Palace as soon as possible. "Save me, brother. Help me block." Boom. A clear explosion sounded in his ears, and the cry for help came to an abrupt end. Qin Hao was not disturbed at all. He clenched his fists and madly rushed forward. Under the premise that he did not expose himself, he used all the power that he could currently use to the extreme. He only lacked the water and wind divine steps. The Slayer's cultivation is extremely strong. Moreover, they have the unfathomable Azura divine Lord behind them. I have forgotten everything that I have learned in the sword world. Sword arts, alchemy, water and wind divine steps, and golden finger have nothing to do with me. Qin Hao clenched his teeth and forcefully hypnotized himself. Right now, he was only a pure slaughter cultivator. Other than the Tao of slaughter, he did not know anything else. If he exposed even a trace of abnormality and attracted the attention of the red-clothed hunters, the consequences would be unimaginable. Chapter 2165. On Azura Peak, Superior Divine Master and Jixiang each had their own thoughts. Their divine senses enveloped the god domain and saw the scene of the redcoats chasing after the new Tianlun. Superior Divine Master and Jixiang had good eyesight, so they could see through Qin Hao's sword technique and water-wind god steps. The slaughter world was different from the other god domains. The Nether Demon Domain, Yellow Spring Domain, and even the Broken Ghost Domain were protected by an extremely strong force. Even God Kings couldn't easily enter. Therefore, Jun Mo couldn't use force to dig out Qin Hao from the Slaughter World. After all, this wasn't the Sword Domain. On the day of the destruction of the Infinite God Domain, Jun Mo used the Heaven's Eye, with the help of the Divine King Seal, to find Qin Hao hiding in the Slaughter World. The Slaughter World didn't welcome the Tian Luan from the outside world. If Qin Hao wanted to leave, he could only mix in with the new Tian Luan. Today, Jun Mo finally got his chance. All the new Tian Luan that had been baptized by the flames of war had gathered in the Slaughter Divine Realm. As long as he could find Qin Hao, he wouldn't even need to do anything. The people of the Slaughter Divine Realm would take the initiative to drive Qin Hao away. No matter how he hides, I'll recognize him even if he turns into ashes. Jun Mo grabbed the armrest of the chair and began to get excited. He just needed to wait. At this time, beams of red light intertwined as Qin Hao ran along the God Domain toward Azura Peak. Even though he couldn't use Water Wind God steps, he was still as agile as a slippery loach, shuttling through the various battles with ease. The strength of the red-clothed hunters was astonishing. Although they were hunting, they still held back. They did not use all of their strength, as if they were stabilizing their strength at a relatively balanced level. They could not only eliminate the trash in the new Tian Luan realm, but also give the outstanding ones a chance to escape. The fire beacon was a baptism, and so was the hunting. More than 100 celestial level 2 Vane's redcoats unleashed their full strength, and even the perfect heavenly wheel would not be able to withstand it. Divine Lord Azura would definitely not completely cut off the path of survival for the new heavenly wheel. Otherwise, the 500 years of Fire Beacon would also lose its meaning. This was like a second round of screening, eliminating the inferior and leaving only the best. Even so, the redcoat was still very dangerous. Qin Hao had seen on the way that those who had just entered the divine realm and below the saint rank heavenly wheel could not withstand a single blow from the redcoat. Only the best of the saint rank heavenly wheel, or even the celestial rank heavenly wheel, had a chance to resist the redcoat. Even though the resistance was still very weak, the redcoat was still holding back. If the attack failed, the redcoat would give up the chase and look for another target. I've survived 500 years of war. I definitely won't die in divine domain at the hands of a bunch of redskin flies. My shadowless god wind kick, bang. Before he could finish his words, a red beam of light pierced through the top of his head. The upper half of his body exploded, leaving behind 2 ownerless legs. No one knew where they had run off to. Qin Hao's heart violently contracted as he watched. The scenes he saw along the way stimulated him. It was too crazy, as expected of the divine realm of massacre. At this time, a large-scale battle appeared in front of him. There were more than 10 redcoat figures in the middle of the battle. It was obvious that the members of the 2 great divine clans were trapped here. Jia Kong, whom Qin Hao had met earlier, was also here. Unfortunately, the young master of the Gach clan did not have many followers left. In addition, the remaining members of the Hengchuan clan were also trapped here, making their final struggle. Qin Hao twisted his steps and turned into an extremely wide arc. He quickly avoided the battle in front of him, leaving behind a trail of smoke behind him as he circled around. As if he had noticed Qin Hao's aura, Jia Kang's face was no longer calm. He panted and shouted at Qin Hao, "Brother, come and help me. Help me." Qin Hao's strength was not ordinary. He had broken the Eclipse clan's bloodline divine technique with one blow. If he was willing to help, it would reduce the pressure on Jia Kang to a certain extent. He might even have a chance to escape. However, there were anxious shouts. Qin Hao did not turn his head. His face was cold as usual. He rolled up a cloud of dust and disappeared from Jia Kang's sight, leaving the young master of the Gach clan in a mess. This was too heartless. He had helped Qin Hao before. Go and chase him alone. At this time, a redcoat who seemed to be the leader stood coldly in the middle of the battle. He glanced at Qin Hao's disappearing figure. He ran so fast. Whoosh! Immediately, in the midst of the battle, a red coat broke away. He followed the leader's order and chased after Qin Hao. The light wheels kept collapsing. The people around him fell one by one. Soon, in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, only Jia Kong was left. His legs were trembling. He looked around with unfocused eyes. The ground was full of broken corpses. The descendants of the divine clans who had formed an alliance with the Gach clan had all died in the divine realm. Including the team led by the Hengchuan clan, there was no one alive. Am I, Jia Kong, going to die here? Jia Kong lowered his head and smiled bitterly. He did not see the body of the young master of the Hengchuan clan among the corpses of the Hengchuan clan. It must have been scattered and was not here. But he was not so lucky. Trash! An angry curse came from the front. It came from the mouth of the redcoat leader. The other party's sharp eyes stared at Jia Kong. For some reason, the leader was so angry that his whole body was trembling slightly. In a flash, he raised his hand and slapped Jia Kang's face, throwing him to the ground. Looking at Jia Kong, who was curled up in the black soil, the redcoat leader raised his hand. The divine light did not blast down. He swung his hand fiercely and turned his body over. He said hoarsely, "Get lost." Jia Kong covered his face and was stunned. When he saw the redcoat leader's wrist with his hands behind his back, there was a divine emblem that only the Gach clan had. Suddenly, Jia Kong seemed to have thought of something. He let out a howl and bounced off the ground like a rabbit, disappearing from the area. "Leader, this." The other redcoat leaders were shocked. "You didn't see anything. Understand?" The redcoat leader's sharp eyes looked around at his subordinates. "We understand." More than a dozen redcoat hunters cupped their hands. Immediately, they turned into divine light and scattered in all directions, chasing after the other New Tian Luan clan members. "Ah, for the sake of the clan, I disobeyed the orders of the Slayer." The redcoat leader lowered his head and sighed. He was also from the Gach clan. Even a vicious tiger would not eat its own cubs. The person he let go was his bloodline descendant, Wang. An incomparably turbulent divine intent swept over from behind. The terrifying aura was like a block of ice that was branded on a younger generation. Qin Hao felt his body getting colder and colder. He knew that he was being targeted, but he still did not stop running. He did not waste his energy on fighting. He should try to get to Shura Feng as soon as possible. Just as the red coat behind him was getting closer and closer, suddenly, two balls of slaughtering divine light blasted from the side. Suddenly, the space was filled with the roar of a ferocious beast. Qin Hao turned his gaze and saw two faces. They were the young men from the Eclipse clan who attacked Ruo Ling on the way here. However, the Eclipse clan members were not having a good time. Of the 4 young men brought by the old man, only 2 were left, and both of them were injured. The moment they attacked Qin Hao, they immediately turned around and ran. Their goal was obviously not to kill Qin Hao, but to hinder him. They hoped that Qin Hao would be killed by the red coat behind him. Bang! Bang! The 2 slaughtering divine lights that contained the nature of beasts were smashed into powder by Qin Hao's fists. Under the impact of the laws, his footsteps were slightly sluggish. The young man from the Eclipse clan had indeed achieved his goal. However, when a young man in black who blasted out the beast aura turned around to look, he was shocked by the scene in front of him. He saw that the red coat hunter who was chasing from behind had been slashed away by Qin Hao's spear. The shining spear shadow tore a bloody wound on the redcoat's body. "Since you like to be nosy, why don't you be nosy again?" Qin Hao stared at the 2 young men from the Eclipse clan who were running away. A layer of black divine light wrapped around his feet. He was 3 times faster than before. In the blink of an eye, he reached out to grab the 2 men from behind. "Fly, run with all your might," one of the young men from the Eclipse clan said to his companion in black. However, his companion in black hit him in the chest. Under the bombardment of divine power, his companion was sent flying in the direction of Qin Hao. "You will die anyway. Why don't you fulfill my wish?" The young man in black sneered. His Tian Luan exploded completely. It turned into a ball of beast aura and fled into the void. "You?" The companion in black was filled with grief and indignation. At this moment, he felt his shoulder being grabbed by a strong hand. In an instant, he was thrown into the air for the second time. Qin Hao did not even look at him. He directly threw his companion toward the injured redcoat. Puff! The blood-divine light penetrated one of the bodies, making the redcoat even more colorful. It was as if Qin Hao's spear had brought great humiliation to the redcoat. He did not expect that Qin Hao's sudden burst of strength would be so strong. It was far beyond his expectations. After all, the redcoat had always kept his bottom line. "Boy, you have successfully angered me," the redcoat said coldly. The redcoat said coldly. He ignored the deep spear wound on his chest. When he operated his Tianlin, his two divine meridians glowed with a bright red light. Qin Hao did not care about the curse that came from behind him. He stomped on the ground and moved at 3 times the speed. Just as the young man in black from the Eclipse clan turned around to look, his hand grabbed the young man's neck. He twisted it with all his might. Crack! With the sound of bones breaking, Qin Hao threw the body toward the redcoat. "You can't escape." The redcoat was very angry. He was a celestial-level Tian Luan cultivator, a rare genius in the slaughtering world. It was hard to find one in 1,000 years. He had 20,000 years of cultivation, but he had suffered a great loss in the hands of a new Tian Luan cultivator. If this were to spread to the other redcoats, they would be laughed at by their peers. However, just as the infuriated redcoat was about to attack Qin Hao with all her might, a beam of light fell from the sky and blocked Redcoat's path. "Your mission is complete. You can get lost now." In the light, an extremely tall cultivator with a head full of black hair and an extremely cold and malicious look on his face turned his head and silently stared at the red-robed man. When this pair of eyes fell on him, the redcoat's anger dissipated. He froze on the spot as if he had lost his mind. His body began to tremble faintly, and the trembling became more and more intense. "Yes, yes." The redcoat's face was filled with great shock. He stuttered as he answered. He turned into a red divine light and left. It was as if the person he had met was as terrifying as the god of death. At the same time, Qin Hao, who was in the air, also stopped. It was not that he did not want to leave, but he felt that Feng Tian was confined by an extremely tyrannical force. Even if he wanted to leave, the person behind him would definitely not let him leave. "Show me all your strength. You only have one chance." The cold voice was filled with malice. The evil face of Azura slowly opened its mouth toward Qin Hao, revealing a smile that made one's scalp tingle. Chapter 2166. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. It was cold and quiet. It was as if he had returned to the time when he had just fallen into the slaughtering world. The space was shrouded in an ominous aura. Qin Hao slowly turned around. He had recultivated for 4 lifetimes and experienced countless trials. His intuition told him that the person in front of him was 100 times, no, 1,000 times more terrifying than the redcoat. He did not know how strong the Divine Master's servant, the Slayer, was, but from his appearance and aura, he felt that this person was even more dangerous. "Bring out all your strength. You only have one chance." What a familiar sentence. Jun Mo had once warned Lu Qiu like this. This sentence was full of confidence in his power, like the maxim of a desolate monarch looking down on the common people. In the enchantment of reality, on the floating glass platform, Jun Mo had destroyed Lu Qiu's glazed sword spirit, who had dominated the sword world. At this moment, the same arrogant warning, even colder than Jun Mo's, entered Qin Hao's ears. It was as if fate had given him a ruling. Qin Hao slowly opened his arms and lifted them slightly. His body was filled with turbulent nomological particles. Surrounded by black, killing currents, the divine spears of massacre were arranged around him. With a thought, countless spear auras broke through the air and pierced through the great path. Together with Qin Hao, they advanced toward the Azura evil form. At this moment, the sound of swords rang out in the space. All things were interconnected. Although Qin Hao could not use the way of the sword, he could use the way of the sword and the way of the spear. When he attacked, It was the essence of his 4 lifetimes of recultivation. Back then, at the sunset peak, he had destroyed his dharma at the price of his nirvana. The dragon spirit dharma had focused on the way of the spear. Now, all the results had been returned to Qin Hao. This spear contained all his understanding of the divine path. However, the evil face of Azura maintained its smile. That smile did not give off the slightest hint of warmth or friendliness. It was filled with extreme malice. As the spear light pierced through the sky, the evil face simply waved its hand, and boundless black light of the great path surged forward. It set off a terrifying force in the space, like a raging storm, mixed with the mournful screams of countless dead souls. The godly slaughtering spears kept collapsing and shattering, but the spear light that came after them filled the gap and charged forward against the pressure. They forcibly tore a tiny gap in the thick black light. Qin Hao's feet stepped into the air and kept kicking the spear shadows. He walked with the divine spears that filled the sky. Just as the godly slaughtering spears that were formed by his divine power were completely destroyed. At this time, there was one last divine spear of massacre left in his hand. He clenched the end of the spear with his right hand, gritted his teeth, and stabbed the divine source in the evil form's heart. The evil form's smile became wider. The crack in its mouth became wider. However, it twisted its body and easily dodged the attack. At the same time, it grabbed the spearhead with its other hand. With a crack, the seemingly casual hand strength broke the spear formed by Qin Hao's divine power. Before the will of the way dissipated, the evil form grabbed the sharp spearhead and stabbed it into Qin Hao's heart. Splat! Blood splattered and flew on the Dharma form's smiling face. One of Qin Hao's palms was pierced by the spearhead formed by his own divine power. It entered his divine body and was only a hair's breadth away from the divine source in his abdomen. Taking advantage of this sliver of life, an undetectable, mysterious divine light erupted from his divine source. The appearance of this power reversed the rules of the Great Path. It was the power of the evil form. It broke through the restraints of space and dispersed the divine power that was suppressing this side of the sky. Whoosh! Immediately, Qin Hao endured the intense pain and turned into light to escape. He disappeared in front of the evil form. The evil form's smiling face immediately disappeared. His face suddenly became very embarrassed. Perhaps he had never encountered such an encounter before. He was slightly distracted and neglected to pursue. I haven't attacked in a long time. Did I lose control of my divine power? The evil form lowered its head and looked at his palm in disbelief. Its heart was filled with confusion. The moment he stabbed the spearhead into Qin Hao's chest, why did his divine power of massacre disperse the barrier he had set up? How could this be? Borrowing power to fight power. That young man is not simple. At this time, a voice that was exactly the same as his rang out in the evil form's mind. However, the tone was different. It sounded very gentle. It was Ji Xiang's voice transmission. Oomph! The evil form stepped into the void. With one step, his body disappeared from the vast space of the divine region. Although he was not the Azura body, he had more than 90% of the Azura body's cultivation. To put it bluntly, even a great being at the godly master level would not be able to escape from the evil form's nose. However, just now, he had watched as an ant that was far inferior to a godly master escaped. It was simply, he vomited a mouthful of hot blood into the sky. Qin Hao's hair was messy as he rushed toward Azura foam. The clothes on his chest were torn, revealing a bloody hole. The entire palm of his left hand had become a transparent hole. Broken meridians could be seen flowing out of the flesh and blood. Fortunately, the injury he had suffered was from his own lost spear. The laws were of the same origin. Other than the physical pain, nothing else was affected. Thinking back to the scene just now, he could not help but break out in cold sweat. Too powerful. In front of that strange laughing person, Qin Hao had suffered more pressure than facing Fun Wei in the 10 extremes. It was suffocating. Luckily, the reincarnation mirror had worked. It had reversed the opponent's godly power and broken the space barrier, allowing him to escape. This massacre domain was indeed filled with great beings. First, there was the Slayer, then there was the immortal grade Heavenly Will Redcoat. That person was the most dangerous. How many more terrifying beings were there in the massacre domain? No wonder Mujan had that kind of personality. Qin Hao finally realized that this was not a place for humans to stay. Even gods did not want to stay here. I hope the reincarnation field released by the reincarnation mirror hasn't been discovered. Qin Hao couldn't care less about his bleeding wounds. He couldn't afford to waste any energy. Even if he fell, he had to fall on Azura Peak. If he fell on Azura Peak, he might have a chance to survive. If he fell here, he would definitely die. The red coat, the strange laughing person, these dangers were still there. He did not know when they would come after him. Other than using all his strength to run, he could only leave his life to fate. In the dark slaughter divine realm, there were cracks all over the ground. Streaks of black flames rose from the cracks, swaying like ghosts. The bloody hunting gradually subsided. The originally powerful screams became fewer and weaker until they completely disappeared. At this moment, the massacre domain became unusually quiet. Qin Hao was not the first one to arrive at Azura Foam. When he arrived at the core of the domain, there were already 3 figures kneeling at the foot of the mountain. At first, Qin Hao was curious as to why those people did not rush to the Azura Palace at the top of the mountain. When he arrived at the foot of the mountain, he completely understood. Looking up, there were countless black figures flying around on top of the huge black mountain peak. Each of them was holding a Grim Reaper's scimitar that was shining with a cold light. They floated back and forth like ghosts. Behind the army of ghosts, there were more than a dozen tall figures draped in blood-red cloaks. The aura they emitted was far stronger than the redcoat that had hunted down the new Tian Luan realm cultivators. Qin Hao used his divine thoughts to sense them. He found that none of the figures wrapped in blood-red cloaks were the 4 great leaders of the domain. Some of them were even stronger than the 6 founding elders of the academy. Were they Azura divine generals? Put on. Another kneeling sound was heard. Jia Kong, the young master of the Gach clan, had escaped death. He had almost exhausted all his strength and was the last one to arrive here. However, he was scared stiff by the formation on the mountain. Before the hunting began, the Slayers had told them that they could survive if they stepped into the Azura Palace. However, they did not say that they could survive by standing at the foot of the mountain. Now, the formation in front of them was a sea of ghosts and more than 10 Azura divine generals in red cloaks. How could they break through? How could they survive? God, why is it like this? 500 years of suffering and hunting in the domain of the domain. How can we enter the Azura Palace now? God Master, at the foot of Qin Hao, for figures survived for more than 2,000 new heavenly wheel divine generals. However, they were crying at Azura Foam in complete despair. Not only them, even Qin Hao could not stand steadily. Not to mention that he had suppressed part of his cultivation. Even if he did not suppress it and used all his strength, even if he did not cripple the 2 strands of divine power, he would still not be able to reach the summit. Despair engulfed Qin Hao's godly soul, just like how it had engulfed the other 4. Congratulations, you have successfully passed the last test and become the first 5 new Azura guards to step onto the Azura Mountain in the past 1,000 years. Come, the God Master and some distinguished guests are waiting for you. Just as Qin Hao's heart was about to give out, the Slayer's figure appeared at the end of the mountain and passed down in order. Suddenly, the 4 people kneeling on the ground in pain and Qin Hao, who was on the verge of collapsing, felt their bodies lighten. It was as if a mountain in hell had been removed from their bodies. When they looked at each other, they were all shocked and could not hide their excitement and joy. It was the joy of surviving a disaster. We made it. Yes, we made it. Ha, ha, ha. What are you laughing at? The Slayers are waiting for us at the top of the mountain. The few lucky ones who were in the same situation helped each other up from the ground. They dragged their exhausted bodies and staggered towards the cold stone steps that were like a stairway to heaven. You Are you okay? Jia Kong glanced at Qin Hao. The wound on his chest seemed to be very serious, and one of his hands was almost crippled. Qin Hao glanced at Jia Kong coldly and walked on his own. After stepping on the stone steps, he kept a distance from the others, as if he wanted to distance himself from them. This guy is so cold. Jia Kong raised his head helplessly and walked toward the top of the mountain. It was common for people in the world of killing to be cold and indifferent. However, it was rare to see someone as cold as Qin Hao. After all, among more than 2,000 Heaven Wheel experts, only 5 of them had survived. However, he did not feel lucky at all. As they walked up the stone steps, many Shura guards in black robes screamed at Qin Hao and the others. They waved their sharp scimitars in the air, as if they were going to cut off Qin Hao and the others' necks at any moment. Facing such a group of lunatics, Jia Kong and the others felt a lot of pressure. After all, they were newcomers. However, Qin Hao did not feel anything. He had already made it through the first hurdle and had gained a foothold in the world of killing. He was thinking about the next step, how to cross the world of killing. In the end, before he could think of an idea, he saw the enemy that he did not want to see the most in his life, but also wanted to see the most. The Prince of Tianzhou, Jun Mo Dong. Qin Hao's footsteps paused as he landed on the Azura field. The lineup in front of him was quite spectacular. Not only was Jun Mo there, Shangji, Fen Wei, and a middle-aged man in a long row were also there. Qin Hao knew that the middle-aged man was the Xianqi that fought with the martial god ancestor. In addition, there was a group of 500 elites from the Tianzhou divine domain. They were majestically pressing down on the Azura peak. This lineup was very similar to the scene of the massacre in the infinite divine domain. Creak! Qin Hao clenched his fists. A monstrous killing intent surged from his heart to his head. His eyes gradually became bloodshot. The tragic deaths of Senior Infinite, Daisakong, Immortal Dong Sheng, Teacher Blind Sword, and the other 6 elders of the academy appeared in his mind repeatedly, alternating constantly. They were either killed alive or forced to break their celestial source spirit. The scene of thousands of swordsmen falling was still vivid in his mind. Many of them did not even have bones left. These strongly stimulated Qin Hao, causing his body to faintly emit the sound of a sword wanting to take revenge. Chapter 2167. Wooling Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Jun Mo's probing of the 2,000 new Tian Luan realm cultivators who went through the baptism of fire. Only 5 made it to Azura Peak alive. In the Azura field on the peak, other than the God Master Azura Guards and God Generals, there was also a force from the outside world, the Heavenly Edict Godly King Army. Qin Hao's killing intent surged as soon as he saw Jun Mo. At the same time, Jun Mo, who was sitting on a chair, had a sharp look in his eyes. Under his lazy demeanor, he was seriously sizing up the 5 newly promoted Heavenly Wheel experts. The aura of the Massacre World cultivators was very special, and they carried a strong killing intent. Therefore, Jun Mo didn't feel anything strange about Qin Hao. Qin Hao had used his godly power to distort his facial features, so Jun Mo couldn't recognize him just from his appearance and aura. "What do you think, Upper Extreme Godmaster?" Zhixiang asked with a gentle expression. He wanted to hear Upper Extreme's opinion. Not really. Every god world has its own unique way of survival. Azura God Master pushed this world's survival rules to the extreme, so the Tianlun realm cultivators are all extraordinary. Upper Extreme actually admired Azura's methods. He chuckled. However, it's still too cruel. Even Upper Extreme thought that Azura's methods were abnormal. After all, he could clearly sense the outside of Azura Peak with his godly power. What if you were sitting in my position, or if your methods were even more shocking? Zhixiang didn't expect others to understand. The Massacre World was declining due to the death of Underworld Godmaster. If they didn't think of ways to strengthen themselves, once the power protecting the God World disappeared, how could they survive? Upper Extreme who was under the shadow of the heavenly edict, godly king, didn't understand. "Come and greet Azura, God Master." Slayer took a few steps forward and yelled at Qin Hao and the others. Qin Hao and the others looked at Ji Xiang and Blue. From their conversation with Upper Extreme, they knew that this person was the master of the massacre world, Azura. "We Lower Tian Lun Realm cultivators greet Azura, God Master." Crash! Qi Zhanzhan knelt on the ground. Qin Hao and the rest kowtowed to Ji Xiang in unison. Then, they turned to Shang Ji, Fun Wei, Xin Qi, and the rest. "Greetings, great gods. Rise," Ji Xiang said. "You have experienced 500 years of calamity in the lower realm, and you have narrowly escaped death in the divine realm. That is how you have distinguished yourselves. From today onwards, you will be my Red Spectre trainee." "Thank you, Divine Lord." Qin Hao and the other four stood up. At this moment, Jia Kong and the others felt relaxed. The Red Spectres are different from the normal Shura guards. They are the elites of the slaughtering world. As new Tian Luan realm members, you are not qualified to become a Red Spectre yet. You need to go through a few more trials before you can become a regular Red Spectre, Slayer explained to the five of them. Qin Hao looked around the Shura field. It was just as Slayer had said. The Shura guards were like ghosts. They wore black robes, but they were weaker than the Red Spectres. They were just normal Shura guards. As for the Red Spectres who had hunted Qin Hao and the others, they were the elites of the slaughtering world. Every Red Spectre had emerged from the 500 years of calamity, as well as other Red Spectres who had hunted them. They had also gone through the same test as Qin Hao. According to the rules of the past, you still need to go through another test. However, we have an important guest today. Prince Jun Mo of the Tianzhao Divine Realm has come with his subordinates. He wants to see the abilities of the geniuses of the slaughtering world. Then you can show His Highness Jun Mo a thing or two. Treat it as my final test. After Ji Xiang finished speaking, he looked at Jun Mo. "I wonder how His Highness Jun Mo would like to teach us?" Jia Kong boldly took a step forward. His words were especially sharp. Facing the Azura Divine Lord, they were naturally in awe. However, they did not need to be polite to the gods of the outside world, even if they were the descendants of the Divine King. It is rumored that all the cultivators of the slaughtering world have extraordinary battle prowess. Seeing you today, this palace has truly widened my horizons. Jun Mo stood up from his chair, placed his hands behind his back, and slowly walked in front of Jia Kong and the others. He patted Jia Kang's shoulder and said, "Yes, although you are a new Tian Luan realm expert, this palace can feel the momentum hidden in your Tao." Following the patting, Jia Kong could not help but groan. His body slightly tilted as Jun Mo patted him. Shortly after, Jun Mo walked away with a smile and arrived in front of the second new Tian Luan realm expert. He scrutinized him a few times and similarly patted his shoulder. However, this new Tian Luan realm expert groaned, and his body also tilted. "Your body is very sturdy." The Tian Luan realm experts created by the environment of the slaughtering world are indeed not ordinary. Jun Mo praised hypocritically. Then, he took a step forward and arrived in front of the third person. His palm fell down, and just as the third newly promoted Tian Luan realm expert was like Jia Kong and the second person, his body also tilted to the side. However, an extremely cold killing intent suddenly erupted, and his shoulder, which was slightly shorter by an inch, was immediately pushed back. "Your temper is not small. You have ambition." Jun Mo nodded at the third, new Tian Luan realm expert, who had a fierce look on his face. In his heart, he was cursing him. He actually dared to resist. If this was the Tianzhao divine domain, he would have died thousands of times. Next, Jun Mo walked in front of the fourth person. This person was Qin Hao. Bang! The palm that contained divine power slammed down. When it landed on Qin Hao's shoulder, Qin Hao felt a surge of power enter his body through his shoulder and wander through his meridians. Suddenly, Qin Hao's Tian Luan realm reacted. His divine power instinctively rebounded to resist Jun Mo's power. At this moment, an extremely murderous aura erupted from Qin Hao's body. It was stronger and more violent than the previous three people. When Junmo's palm landed, not only did it not tilt Qin Hao's body, but also shocked Qin Hao's sudden burst of aura. His palm instinctively moved away. His face was slightly distorted as he saw a layer of black ice crystals condensed in the center of his palm. What a pure Tao of slaughter! Junmo was secretly shocked. He looked at Qin Hao seriously. When his gaze landed on the gunshot wound on his chest, he saw that blood was flowing out. However, Qin Hao was like an emotionless wooden man. He was as dull as a hard rock. Not to mention pain, there was no expression on his face. A talent that can be cultivated, Junmo said sincerely. This time, it was not perfunctory. His attitude was very sincere. After suffering such a heavy injury and taking a palm strike from his 30,000 years of cultivation, the shock caused the blood in his body to flow in reverse. However, he did not even frown. Even if this was the Tianjiao divine domain, Junmo would definitely take him under his command. "Thank you for your praise, Your Highness," Qin Hao said expressionlessly. His gaze was fixed on Azura Jixiang from the beginning. It was as if he did not see Junmo, the divine prince, at all. Chapter 2168. Phew. Lord Mo exhaled, as if he was feeling a little depressed. This was the first time he was ignored by a heavenly wheel ant whose status was far below his. However, this was also very normal. After all, this was the world of slaughter, and the living beings only had eyes for God Lord Azura. Next, Junmo tested the last person. The fifth newly promoted Tian, Luan Realm Cultivator, was a woman. She was similarly cold, and there was no sense of awe in her eyes towards Junmo. She was also a pure person of the slaughter world. Junmo couldn't help but feel tangled in his heart, as if probing the five of them shouldn't have resulted in such a result. He couldn't detect the slightest divine power of space and fire from the new Tianlun, and even a trace of sword intent. "How is it?" Shangji transmitted her voice. Junmo turned his head slightly and looked at Shangji with an ugly expression. Shangji instantly understood that Junmo had failed to detect anything out of the ordinary. "How about this? Since God, Lord Azura, also said that you lack the final test, why don't I send out a random person? As long as the five of you can defeat my disciple, you will pass." God Lord Fervor stepped forward and looked at Azura's wisdom minister. "Okay." Jixiang nodded with a smile. Fervor's disciple wanted to ask him about the Massacre World's Massacre Tao, which was exactly what Azura wanted. No objections. Junmo returned to his seat with a cold expression. He was very unhappy that he didn't manage to test the five people's true strength. However, he wanted to see if Qin Hao really wasn't hiding among the five new Heavenly Will experts. Once they fought, no matter what method Qin Hao used to hide his original divine energy, it would be exposed. "Huang Dao," God Lord Fervor shouted. His disciple, Huang Dao, immediately stepped out from the crowd of heavenly Zhao soldiers and stood in front of Jia Kong and the others. He sneered, "Please don't be stingy with your teachings. Whether it's one-on-one or all together, the loser will rest." "The loser will rest?" Qin Hao muttered in his heart and sneered. "Was it here again? You want to recreate the floating glazed dojo in the world of slaughter?" All those years ago, Huang Dao stood towering on the Dao platform by himself and swept through all the sword cultivators in the three dimensions, and he was insufferably arrogant. In the end, he was crushed by Long Mian. Now, he really didn't learn from his mistakes. "My disciple's cultivation is deeper than yours, and his divine force is also stronger than yours. The five of you can just come at me together to save us the trouble. Moreover, you all only need to hold on for 10 breaths at a time." Fen Wei took advantage of the situation and said, his body exuding an extremely heavy aura of resentment. More than 100 years ago, he and two other divine lords had followed Junmo here to ask for Qin Hao's whereabouts. In the end, Shura's dog servant had a disagreement and severely injured them. The two divine lords of the Tianjiao divine domain had fallen. If Fen Wei hadn't run away quickly and escaped with Junmo, he wouldn't be standing here alive today. It would be strange if he didn't have any resentment. That was why he had sent Huang Dao out to teach Azura's 5 trashy divine guard the lesson. All right, Ji Xiang maintained a gentle smile and ordered, "The 5 of you will spar with divine Lord Fun Wei's disciple. You must respect your opponent and do your best. Oh, right, there's no need to be calculative about life and death. If you die, it proves that you aren't qualified to become my divine guards in red." As he spoke, Ji Xiang's gaze lingered on Qin Hao for a moment longer. The Wuxian's previous attack had failed to find out the real situation. Ji Xiang wanted to see if this new god who had come with the Wu god was a hidden big fish in a situation where life and death were no longer at stake. Fun Wei had sent Huang Dao to vent his resentment, and Ji Xiang was using this opportunity to test Qin Hao's true identity. Why not? Does your Highness Jun Mo have any objections? Ji Xiang asked politely to Jun Mo. He didn't care about life and death. This, Huang Dao was a little uncomfortable and turned to look at his master. Since Divine Lord Azura is so honest, I naturally have no objections. Huang Dao, you don't have any objections either, right? Jun Mo said coldly. You don't have the confidence to take down 5 newbies who have just entered the divine path? Fun Wei glared at Huang Dao. Was he afraid of 5 newbies? I have no objections. Huang Dao's expression turned solemn. He turned to face Qin Hao and the others, putting on a solemn expression. Jun Mo didn't have any objections, and so did Fun Wei. In other words, if Huang Dao failed miserably, even if he died in the world of massacre, no one would avenge him. His master couldn't interfere in the battle. However, as Fun Wei had said, Huang Dao couldn't possibly lose to 5 newbies. There was no reason for him to lose. After all, he was an immortal-grade heavenly wheel expert with 20,000 years of cultivation. Since that's the case, then let the spar begin. As soon as Ji Xiang's voice fell, Slayer waved his hand and swept out a mass of killing light. It turned into a barrier that sealed the 6 people in the field. The moment the barrier enveloped them, Huang Dao didn't know why, but he felt like a heavy coffin lid was falling on his head. He had a bad feeling. This person's divine intent is very strong. Let's attack together. Among the 5 newbies, the most ferocious youth said to the others. The scar on his face was twisted like a worm. Okay, the others nodded. Brother, I know you are very arrogant, but we have already been forced to a dead end. As long as we work together to kill this guy from the outside world, we can officially become Red Shura guards of the Divine Lord. At this juncture, let go of your pride and fight for survival with us. Jia Kong reached out a hand to Qin Hao, his eyes filled with sincerity. Although Jia Kong didn't know how strong Huang Dao was, he could feel the pressure from him that was comparable to a red coat. Obviously, Huang Dao's strength was very similar to the group of redcoats that had hunted them down. They were at the same level. Thinking about how the 2,000 newbies had died, facing such a strong opponent, if Qin Hao couldn't unite with them and maintain his pride, then what awaited them would be death. Only by uniting would they have a chance. Pride? Qin Hao looked at the young master of the Gach clan. Half of his body was stained with blood from the gunshot wound on his body. The corners of his mouth curled up into a sickly smile, just like an evil face, which contained a strong sense of malice. Then a bloody hand with broken meridians flowing out grabbed Jia Kang's hand and said, "Actually, I have never been proud." His pride was only pushed by the world. Kill! The youth with the scar roared. His body was filled with killing light. A ring of light surrounded him, and his meridian-like divine power almost reached his bones. Like Huang Dao, it wasn't just the ferocious youth with the scar. Every newbie here was actually at the immortal grade. To be able to avoid being hunted by a redcoat and stand out from more than 2,000 competitors, how could they not have some hard capital? Buzz! Buzz! Streaks of wheel light were released one after another. Although they were newbies, the killing will released by these 5 people at the same time almost froze the space within the barrier. Huang Dao took a step back. His expression changed, and his heart suddenly sped up. Even though Huang Dao had always thought of himself as extraordinary, when facing 5 opponents of the same level. Even if he was a newbie who had just entered the divine path, he still felt a trace of fear in his heart. 5 immortal grade heavenly wheels. Fenway couldn't sit still anymore and stood up. The show is about to start. No matter who you are, don't act rashly in my territory. Jixiang smiled kindly at Fenway. Regardless of life and death, it didn't only refer to the 6 people who were fighting in the barrier. Similarly, it also included Jun Mo, Fenway, and Shangji. Whoever dared to interfere in the battle and spoil Shura's show would not be able to leave the massacre divine realm safely today. Chapter 2169. In the Azura Arena, a battle of life and death was about to break out. The leaders of the 2 forces had different thoughts, but their goals were the same. That was to find out Qin Hao, the sword cultivator hiding among the 5 new heavenly will cultivators. Qin Hao is sandwiched between Azura and Jun Mo. If he exposed even the slightest bit of abnormality, there was no way he could survive. After all, Azura was not seamless. He was willing to risk everything to protect him. Boom! Inside the enchantment, the battle immediately went into a frenzy. It was extremely intense. This was a battle of life and death. If the 5 new heavenly wheel experts who had survived the fire beacon tribulation wanted to live, they had to kill Huang Dao. If Huang Dao wanted to walk out of the enchantment, he would have to step on the corpses of Jia Kong and the others. Both sides had no way out. The scar-faced young man was the first to make a move. As he released his sky wheel, a strong, bloody aura emanated from his body. He cultivated the same killing technique as Qi Yin's sect master, which belonged to the Bloody Massacre path. The Bloody Massacre Dao will turn into a red mist that enveloped Huang Dao. The pungent smell in the air was accompanied by a rotten stench. This was the first time Huang Dao had fought with a Massacre domain sky wheel, so he felt very uncomfortable. The rotten stench made him feel nauseous. Kill! Blood mist permeated the air, and the air became abnormally humid. A bright red palm, like a ghost claw, reached for Huang Dao's chest. The scar-faced youth stared at that spot. That spot was Huang Dao's divine source. Huang Dao wasn't from the slaughter world. Fighting here, he was suppressed by the heavenly might of the great Dao. His divine power was weakened by 30%. Although he couldn't adapt for a while, his reaction was still very fast. His fist light broke through the air, and the resplendent fist light whistled past, dispersing the blood mist that enveloped him. Following that, the scarred young man screamed in agony. He attacked first, but he couldn't beat Huang Dao, who attacked first. He was actually sent flying with a single punch. Bang! The powerful fist energy entered the body, and the divine power accumulated by 20,000 cultivation experience surged. Huang Dao was facing 5 celestial-grade Tianlun, and he could not hold back. This blow directly shattered the protective halo of the scarred youth, and the Tianlun was almost shattered. Slay! Jia Kong strode forward and formed a mass of slaughter seals between his palms. The Tianlun on his body flashed with a golden divine light, giving off a holy and honorable feeling. Jia Kang's slaughter technique was the same as the Wu gods, cultivating the path of slaughter. Wong. Huge golden divine thorns fell down like a cage from the sky, covering Huang Dao's head. At the same time, the rest of the 5 also made their moves. There was a thin and weak young man with a crazy sneer on his face. His body flashed, and he disappeared into the air. It was as if his aura had fused with the space, and he had disappeared. There was also the cold woman who spat out a pale, white bead from her mouth. It kept growing bigger in her palm. There were ghostly cries coming from the bead. Suddenly, there was a gust of cold wind. Countless cursed green threads of light swept out from the bead and wrapped around Huang Dao. When Qin Hao attacked, he silently looked at the woman. At this moment, the aura she was emitting was filled with hatred. She was a cursed object. This made Qin Hao understand that she cultivated curses. Swish! A cold light fell into his palm. Qin Hao's slaughter divine power condensed into the divine slaughter spear. The spear was like a dragon, stabbing straight at Huang Dao's heart. That movement and posture seemed to be full of loopholes, but it carried a perverted determination. Truly a group of lunatics. Huang Dao had fought with many geniuses of the divine world, including the sword cultivators of the sword world. However, there was no one from the divine world that was as crazy as the people from the slaughter world. The 5 people in front of him clearly had weak divine power, but their aura contained a perverted madness. Huang Dao looked at the scarred youth who was lying on the ground crawling back up. His cracked Tianlun emitted an even more intense blood qi. He understood that this battle had to be ended quickly. Otherwise, if the 5 people in front of him seized any opportunity, even if it was a small chance, it could take his life. Scram! Huang Dao was too lazy to look above his head. He punched the sky, and the powerful fist destroyed the golden thorns that filled the sky. His Tianlun revolved, and the resplendent divine power turned into a sturdy astral qi to protect his divine body. The curses released by the woman stopped in front of Huang Dao, unable to pass through the astral qi to affect the person inside. Huang Dao immediately punched again. The cold wind was dispersed, and the floating curses were extinguished. The woman was hit by the punch, and she fell down, vomiting mouthfuls of blood. At this moment, Huang Dao noticed that an undetectable danger was quietly approaching. Although the other party's slaughter technique was brilliant, it was a pity that he was not a spatial cultivator. He was unable to completely fuse his aura with the space. Huang Dao stretched out his hand. Just as the skinny young man was about to stab at him with a sharp knife, Huang Dao grabbed his wrist. With a loud bang, blood splashed out. Huang Dao's powerful palm broke the skinny young man's wrist. The sharp knife that had been dipped in poison immediately fell to the ground. The skinny youth hurriedly retreated. The pain from his broken wrist did not make him lose his fighting spirit. Since his attack had failed, he knew that Huang Dao would not let him go. Just as the skinny youth had guessed, after Huang Dao broke the skinny youth's wrist, he punched again. The resplendent fist energy was like the roar of a ferocious beast. It looked like it was about to swallow the skinny youth. But at this moment, a long spear that contained the light of extreme slaughter swept over. With a bang, it collided with Huang Dao's fist qi. As the long spear was destroyed, Qin Hao and the emaciated young man were both blasted flying by the aftershock and heavily smashed onto the ground. In one round, all 5 of them had been defeated. Outside the barrier, Godlord Fen Wei slapped his thigh and laughed wildly. He looked at Ji Xiang and mocked. These are the elites of the slaughter world trained by God, Lord Azura. They could not even withstand a single blow. In the hands of Fen Wei's disciple, Huang Dao, these 5 newly advanced Tianlun realm experts were no different from ants. Moreover, they had the advantage of a great world. Ji Xiang smiled silently and did not reply to Fen Wei. Huang Dao had been in the celestial realm for 20,000 years. Naturally, these 5 newly advanced Tianlun realm experts could not compare to him. However, life and death were different. It was not certain who would have the last laugh. This guy's divine power is too strong. It's like the red coat that hunted us. Jia King's expression was very ugly. His relaxed mood had increased by several times under Huang Dao's fist energy. Either he dies or we die. Even if we have to risk our lives, we have to kill him, the scarlet-faced youth said. The scar-faced young man said. The 5 of them couldn't hold back at all. Whoever was afraid of death would die first. I will block him from the front. You guys look for an opportunity. Qin Hao raised his arm. The black divine power in his palm condensed into a pitch-black slaughter god spear. His eyes were calm and did not have any emotions. He took a firm step forward. Shura, Junimo, and Shangji were watching from the outside. Although Huang Dao was unable to withstand a single blow from Qin Hao, he had to suppress himself and make it seem like his level was similar to Jia Kong and the rest. In terms of advantages, Qin Hao could only rely on his battle experience. This was where Jia Kong and the rest were far inferior to him. Even Huang Dao could not compare to him. They hoped that with his limited strength, Qin Hao could use his rich battle skills to fight for a chance for Jia Kong and the rest to defeat Huang Dao. Good brother. The scarlet-faced youth praised Qin Hao's back. If Qin Hao died first, then even if they had to risk their lives, the four of them had to leave something for Huang Dao. At that moment, Jia Kong and the other three looked at each other with determination. They knew that Qin Hao would not be able to block Huang Dao from the front for long. During this process, the four of them had to think of a way to kill Huang Dao. The slaughter god's spear struck forward. Qin Hao used it perfectly. On the surface, although Huang Dao's divine power was abnormally turbulent, when he fought with Qin Hao, his violent fist force was unable to hit his opponent accurately. Every time he missed by an inch, Qin Hao would be able to dodge it. At the same time, he used the weak spear light to draw sparks from Huang Dao's body. What an exquisite spear skill. An extremely tall, immortal general among the dozen figures in red cloaks, standing side by side outside the arena, looked at Qin Hao with a strange look in his eyes. Qin Hao and Huang Dao's strength were not on the same level. This was something that everyone knew. However, Qin Hao was able to dodge Huang Dao's attack first. This was not simple. The tall divine general knew very well that it was an acquired sense of smell that was honed from countless life and death situations. It had nothing to do with one's strength or realm. The little guy who used the spear in the enchantment was a talent that could be nurtured. In fact, not only the divine general could see it. Zhixiang, Slayer, Junimo, Shangji, and the rest of the big shots could see it too. Chapter 2170. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. You rascal. Huang Dao's fist energy grew more and more turbulent. At this moment, he was already brandishing both his fists. Even so, he was still unable to touch Qin Hao's shadow. Qin Hao's spear was as useless as a toothpick. It was as if he was scratching an itch, causing trouble for Huang Dao. This caused Huang Dao's mood to become increasingly vexed. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jia Kong and the others who were watching the battle prepared to kill Qin Hao in one blow. While they were shocked by Qin Hao's spear skills, they also decided to gamble with their lives. If they couldn't kill Qin Hao in one blow, even if they died under Huang Dao's fist, they had to create an opportunity for the others to kill Huang Dao. Get lost, Huang Dao roared, and the pressure released by the wheel light on his body increased slightly. However, the result was that his divine power was depleted at a faster rate. Once his divine power couldn't support the pressure of the world path, he would enter a period of absolute exhaustion. Boom! As his divine power exploded, the turbulent fist force swept out like a hurricane. This time, Qin Hao couldn't dodge it. After all, the power he could unleash was limited. In the face of absolute power, no matter how rich his combat experience was, it was useless. Immediately, the hurricane spread out and violently blew Qin Hao away. The godly massacre spear in his hand was instantly destroyed. Blood spurted out of his mouth like a fountain. When Qin Hao landed on the ground, one could see with the naked eye that a terrifying crack had already appeared on his celestial light wheel. Now, kill him. The fist force swept out like a hurricane. Huang Dao's eyes were bloodshot. As a person who worshipped strength, he couldn't kill a new Tianluan after a long time. At this moment, Jia Kong and the other three who had been accumulating power for a long time all moved. The power of their Tianluan was pushed to the limit. Waves of murderous aura intertwined and turned into a thick fog. Blood and green light mixed together, mixed with the gold of the Tao of benevolence. Violent attacks were launched from 4 tricky angles at the same time. Huang Dao, who was rushing towards Qin Hao, was firmly trapped in the middle. The first one to attack was the woman. After all, she was an expert in curses. The pale white bead landed on Huang Dao's head. A disgusting yellowish-white liquid flowed out from the bead and poured all over Huang Dao's body. Because he had used his full strength for a short time, Huang Dao's divine power was in a vacuum. In that moment, the suppression of the slaughter world reached its maximum. A heavy pressure passed through the barrier and fell on Huang Dao's body. Huang Dao's halo dimmed a lot. Cracks appeared on his protective aura because of the suppression of the heavenly might. Thick yellow liquid flowed in through the cracks. Although it was only a little, it dripped on Huang Dao's face and hair. Polo has decreed, judge the soul, the woman mumbled. Her beautiful white and slender fingers turned into a malicious spirit at this moment. She formed the incantation of the slaughter world's ancient divine race. In an instant, Huang Dao walked towards Qin Hao, who was lying on the ground. He suddenly stopped and tore his hair with both hands. He let out a strange and hoarse cry. The disgusting liquid seeped into his flesh and blood from his face. His flesh and blood were corroded. It was as if there was a group of worms biting and gnawing on his divine soul. This was the first time Huang Dao came into contact with the slaughter world's curses. The pain was 100 times worse than having his body torn apart. It swept over him like a tide and drowned him in an instant. Kill. The scar-faced young man saw that Huang Dao's protective aura was gradually being weakened by the slaughter world's curses. His entire body was covered in thick blood. He jumped up and rode on Huang Dao's back. He grabbed Huang Dao's head and started a bite. The skinny youth once again concealed himself in the air. When he reappeared, the dagger dipped in corpse poison had accurately pierced into Huang Dao's chest. The originally powerful protective aura around Huang Dao's body was now useless under the sharp dagger. Puchi, Jia Kong held a large golden thorn in his hands and pierced Huang Dao's body from behind. It went under the scar-faced young man's buttocks and completely penetrated Huang Dao. The bloody thorn emerged for his abdomen. Ah! An incomparably mournful howl resounded throughout the Azura Peak. Fenway looked at the heavily injured Huang Dao. His two hands tightly gripped the armrest of the chair, and his teeth made cracking sounds. This was too crazy. Who would have thought that 5 newly ascended Tianlun experts who had just entered the divine Dao could actually play a powerhouse with 20,000 years of cultivation to death? Huang Dao was Fenway's direct disciple and was nurtured as a successor. Curses flowed in his body. His brain was being eaten by a monster riding on his back. A sharp knife used to refine corpse poison was stuck in his chest, and a large spike of Dao intent pierced through his back, piercing through his entire body. This time, Huang Dao could be said to have truly broken his foundation. He had never thought that he would end up like this. 5 newly ascended Tianlun experts had almost taken his life. What a pity! If your godly power was a little stronger, you could have succeeded. What a pity! Huang Dao stopped howling. Perhaps the repeated attacks had caused him to lose his dignity as a disciple of a master of a realm. At this moment, an extremely strong killing intent emerged from Huang Dao's body. Boom! Godly light exploded. Without any warning, the woman who used the killing curse spat out a mouthful of blood. The pale white pearl floating above Huang Dao's head shattered, and she fainted. The skinny youth tightly gripped the sharp knife and pressed it into Huang Dao's chest with all his might. But now, the knife was blocked by an extremely tyrannical force and could not penetrate even a little bit. Bang! With another sound, the golden thorn that pierced through Huang Dao's entire body was destroyed. The benevolent killing intent slowly dissipated, and a transparent hole appeared in Huang Dao's abdomen. And you, Huang Dao raised his hand and grabbed his back. The ugly guy riding on his back was actually gnawing on his head. Huang Dao could already feel that his scalp was being eaten by the other party. Those teeth that were as sharp as a divine artifact had penetrated his consciousness with a blood-colored will of the Tao of slaughter. However, this was not important. Although Huang Dao's injuries were very serious, he had 20,000 years of cultivation. The period of weakness would only last for a moment. Even if he was still suppressed by heaven's might, the 5 newly ascended heavenly wheel experts who had just entered the divine Tao were still not enough to take his life. Chila, as Huang Dao pulled with all his might, the scarred youth on his back was torn off and thrown to the ground. With a stomp, Huang Dao's heavy foot directly sank into the scarred youth's chest. The bones caved in, and a godly source was stomped into flying ash. The scarred youth's ferocious face stiffened, and his head drooped down powerlessly. His life ended at this moment. However, at the moment of his death, why did another terrifying aura emerge from the barrier? It was too strong, as if it had gathered all the evil in the world. Even in this cold, hell-like world of slaughter, that kind of evil aura was still terrifying. Was it him? The guy who used the spear actually held back his strength. Dong! His head heavily smashed onto the ground. The scarred youth's life was completely cut off. Before he died, the corner of his mouth curled into a strange smile. Chapter 2171. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation God. Slaying 5 newly ascended heavenly wheel experts besiege Huangdao. If their cultivations were similar, any one of them would have the ability to compete with them. However, under the suppression of 20,000 years of cultivation, even if they had the advantage of the heavenly Tao and their heavenly wheels were all at the immortal grade, there was still an obvious gap between the 5 of them. Fighting with their lives, they had damaged Huangdao's foundation. However, they had also paid a heavy price. One of them had died, and the other 4 were severely injured. Scarface's sternum had collapsed, and his celestial source had been destroyed by Huangdao. The female cultivator from the slaughter domain had been attacked by Huangdao's spiritual power and fainted on the ground. Jia Kong and the skinny youth had also been severely injured by the explosion of Huangdao's spiritual power. Now, the 5 of them no longer had the strength to fight. It seemed that the outcome had been decided, and only death awaited them. Huangdao's gloomy gaze looked at the bodies on the ground. After being hit by the killing curse, the flesh on his face was still melting bit by bit. The sharp knife used to refine corpse poison was stabbed into his chest, very close to his celestial source. There was a hole in his abdomen, and mottled divine light floated around the wound to prevent his organs from flowing out. His head was covered in blood, and his hair was twisted into a ball. Half of his scalp had been bitten off by Scarface. In particular, the viscous rule of blood flowed in his body. Scarface had used his teeth to infuse the rule of blood into his heavenly wheel. Each of these attacks was just a little bit stronger. If the opponent's cultivation was the same as the ecliptic Tao, then even if he had 4 lives, he wouldn't be able to survive. Unfortunately, Jia Kong and the rest were too weak. The winner is still me. Fresh blood flowed from his head to Huangdao's face. The second explosion had injured everyone, and the light of his heavenly wheel had dimmed. The rule of blood flowed in his body, and his spiritual power was affected by the killing curse. The sharp knife had sunk into his celestial source. If the hole in his abdomen had been any bigger, his spiritual body would have exploded. However, all of this did not matter. He had won in the end. Taking a step forward, Huangdao extended his arm towards the skinny youth, preparing to kill this despicable fellow who only knew how to sneak attack. However, at this time, a body stood up from a corner, and it was emitting a power that was even stronger than before. Moreover, the aura that came Huangdao's, for translation, Huangdao's outstretched palm stopped. He looked over and saw that it was the cultivator from the massacre world who had used a spear to deal with him. Before he had time to be surprised, he saw, to his horror, that Qinhao's sky wheel had undergone a heaven-defying change. The divine light, which was originally unable to cover his entire body, completely covered his body. Lines of eye-catching divine power interweaved into a net, connecting to every part of his body. Turbulent power flowed. At this moment, Qinhao gave off the feeling that he was a complete world. The Great Path was one, forming a universe of its own. How? Translation, 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 Huang. Realm, level, translation, realm. Translation, translation, translation. Translation when that oppressive aura similar to that of Junimo came, Huang Dao staggered a few steps back. The perfect heavenly wheel was above the immortal grade and was an indispensable condition for becoming an immortal king. In the untainted land, the perfect heavenly wheel was the standard to measure the top evildoers. As the personal disciple of God Wei, no matter how proud Huang Dao was, he had an innate fear of the perfect heavenly wheel. Perfect grade, this, God Lord Fervor's expression changed drastically. His profound energy also furrowed his brows. Jun Emo stared blankly for a moment. Then he slammed his palm on the chair and stood up with a bang sound. His sharp eyes stared at Qin Hao. It seemed as if he had seen through Qin Hao's true identity. He had almost stepped into the enchantment to kill him on the spot. Your Highness, Shangji secretly transmitted a message to Jun Mo, indicating that he should not act rashly. Translator, Transin editor. Transin, although the perfect heavenly wheel was rare, people like Shangji did not feel much about it. The slaughter world was once a part of the underworld. When the underworld God King was alive, the heavenly way was indeed complete. At least a batch of cultivators with perfect heavenly wheel had appeared. For example, the current Azura, God Lord of Netherworld, God Lord of Yumo, and God Lord of Ghost. The underworld God King was gone, and the underworld was divided into 4 parts. The heavenly way was becoming more and more incomplete. However, the underworld God King had left a part of his divine will. Who could guarantee that the slaughter world, which was once a part of the underworld, could not produce a perfect heavenly wheel? At this time, the perfect heavenly wheel in the barrier might not be Qin Hao. All of this needed to be verified. Therefore, Shangji advised Jun Mo not to act rashly. After all, this was the slaughter world. Azura was not a simple person. There were not many god lords in the untainted land who dared to fight with the God King. Azura was probably the only one who survived. Shangji did not know how strong Azura was when he was complete. As of now, he still did not have enough confidence to defeat him. If Jun Mo dared to act rashly, the consequences would be hard to predict. Jun Mo glanced at Shangji and slowly sat back down. From this moment on, he looked at the barrier in a different way. It was as if he was sure that the perfect heavenly wheel inside was Qin Hao. Interesting. Ji Xiang's smile grew wider. Now, Qin Hao had revealed his trump card, which was the perfect heavenly wheel. It just confirmed his and the Slayer's speculation. After all, the perfect heavenly wheel could indeed integrate the heavenly way of various places and cultivate the way of slaughter of the slaughter world. However, he did not know how the sword cultivator who had fled from the sword world would hide his sword intent. Ji Xiang knew very well that even if the perfect heavenly wheel fought with the immortal grade who had 20,000 years of cultivation, it would be very difficult to defeat Huang Dao if he did not use his full strength. According to the information from the sword world, the little sword practitioner who fled with the chaotic divine weapon was actually very weak. He could only defeat Huang Dao if he used his full strength. In that case, Qin Hao would not be able to hide his way of the sword. Ji Xiang was very shrewd, and Shangji was also shrewd. They were old monsters who had lived for countless years. However, to their disappointment and shock, what happened next in the barrier was not what they had imagined. They saw that Qin Hao's entire body was wrapped in evil qi. Wisps of grayish-white evil qi rushed out from the heavenly wheel that surrounded his body and condensed into heads. They swayed on his body and let out ghostly wails. Grief, madness, rage, insanity, despair, hysteria. The faces on each of the skulls were different, and each emotion had reached the extreme. The wailing evil souls that filled the sky seemed to have gathered all the evil in the world and were filled with a strong desire to destroy. Naturally, it also contained the intent to kill. That chilling murderous qi was even purer than that of Ji Xiang, the Slayer, and the dozen Shura divine generals outside the barrier. Not to mention the Shura divine guards on the mountain. When the ordinary Shura divine guards felt the extreme evil qi that Qin Hao emitted, their legs could not help but tremble. They felt as if they had seen the Shura divine lord. That's right, Qin Hao's murderous qi was exactly the same as that of the sure divine lord who lived deep in the palace. It was filled with a heavy sense of oppression that made the living beings in the world of slaughter unable to breathe. You. Huang Dao's trembling finger pointed at Qin Hao's position. His expression changed again and again. He retreated again and again until he was almost at the edge of the barrier. There was originally no one in this world, but when the first person walked through it, and many people walked through it, it became a Tao. The bloody massacre path, the extreme massacre path, the benevolent massacre path, the stopping massacre path, the murderous curse path, the beast massacre path of the Dark Eclipse tribe, and the mutual massacre path cultivated by the Azure Divine Master had actually come into existence from nothing. Qin Hao had never understood what kind of Tao the massacre path he had cultivated in the massacre realm was. However, today his heart was clear. The massacre path he had cultivated was for slaughtering gods. Countless evil energy swayed behind him. At this moment, it was like a moving evil soul mountain pressing towards Huang Dao Wei. No matter what you are, there is no way you could defeat me. Huang Dao roared, dispelling the fear of the perfect heaven wheel in his heart. He waved the gilded hammer, shaking out balls of turbulent divine light ripples. They turned into layers of sharp ripples that swept out, as if they could cut through everything in the world. Qin Hao maintained a sick smile on his face. His expression was as if he was mocking an ant. The blood-red divine spear trembled, and countless red cold lights flew out. Streaks of spear chi pierced through the great path and collided with the ripples that swept out. At this moment, the barrier that Slayer had personally set up actually produced unstable fluctuations when the two divine weapons collided. Brother, kill him. Jia Kong knelt on the ground and shouted for Qin Hao. I entrust my life and faith to you. Please. The skinny youth struggled a few times. Just as he was about to stand up, he fell back several times. They were too injured. They had only entered the divine path for 100 years. This battle had already emptied them. Even if they wanted to help, they did not have the strength. Boom, boom, boom. Balls of terrifying divine light surged out. In the collision between the spear and the divine hammer, Huang Dao kept swaying and retreating. The blood-red spear sent out strong vibrations, as if it was fighting with an incomparably ferocious beast. The blood in his meridians shook so much that it was about to spurt out from his pores. There was no ordinary autumn, nor was there any match. Ever since Qin Hao completely released the heaven wheel, Huang Dao was still firmly suppressed when they fought again, even if he relied on the mighty divine weapon. In this situation, it was impossible for Huang Dao to win. It depended on how long he could last under the blood-red spear. Perhaps in the next spear, Qin Hao would directly take his life. How can he be so strong? Jun Imo said in shock. It's not that the opponent is too strong. It's Huang Dao's problem. The previous battle seemed simple, but it consumed too much of his strength, Shangji said calmly. Under the suppression of the heaven's might, Huang Dao was already at a disadvantage. The consumption of his divine power was only one aspect. More importantly, Huang Dao's injuries were more fatal. He also bore the curse of the female cultivator from the slaughter domain. The person who died at Huang Dao's hands also blasted his precepts into Huang Dao's heaven wheel before he died. Now, Huang Dao was like an arrow at the end of its flight. From his body to his soul, to his heaven wheel, all of them were affected by the slaughter domain. He seemed to be able to fight, but in reality, his body was already in tatters. Sigh, how boring. Ji Xiang sighed. The slayer silently glanced at his master. As Qin Hao stabbed out with his spear, This Shura divine general's divine weapon of slaughter followed the position of the dagger and pierced through the divine source in Huang Dao's chest. The blood-red spear tip pierced through his body. Under the gloomy light of the world of slaughter, it flashed with an exceptionally beautiful light. Senior Wujian, Senior Seacombe, Teacher Blind Sword, I will take revenge for what happened in the sword world. Qin Hao slowly pulled back his spear. As the evil energy faded away, the evil spirits disappeared. Plop! Huang Dao's cold corpse fell to the ground. His entire body was deathly pale. It was as if all his blood had been sucked dry by the slaughter god's spear. Qin Hao didn't use the evil energy to pluck Huang Dao's Dao intent and divine power. It was too dirty to become a part of the evil spirits. Awoo! The entire Azura Peak was filled with strange shouts. All the black-robed Azura guards raised their sinister scimitars to celebrate Qin Hao's victory. Chapter 2174. Yu Godlord Fenway was so angry that his lips turned purple. He pointed at Qin Hao, then at the Shura guards. Although admitting defeat was shameful, his disciple, Huang Dao, had already admitted defeat. Why did the people of the massacre world still want to kill him? Qin Hao glanced at Fenway expressionlessly, as if he didn't see the suppressed anger on Fenway's face. When the barrier dissipated, he silently walked to the side and stood there in a daze, like an emotionless wooden puppet. Ha! My massacre world has never accepted defeat. When we fight, one must die. This is the massacre world. Ji Xiang stood up from his seat. Good, very good. Fenway gritted his teeth and extended his hand in Qin Hao's direction. Return my divine hammer to me. He had seen Qin Hao put the gilded divine hammer into his own storage ring, and he had just openly taken it for himself. What are you talking about? Ji Xiang moved his ear closer to Fenway and listened carefully. Please say it again. I didn't hear you. Creak. Fenway clenched his fists and dense law particles emerged from his body. What do you think my massacre world is? You want to take back your divine weapon after losing? The Slayer took a step forward. His aura immediately intimidated Fenway, and the law particles on his body dissipated. After all, not long ago, he and the other two god lords had worked together to defeat the Azura's dog slave. This dog slave was too strong. Shangji silently glanced at Fenway and saw that he was angry but helpless. Not only had his disciple died, but he had also lost his divine weapon. What a pitiful guy. Your Highness, Xianqi said to Jun Mo. The matter had been decided, and it was not good to stay. Jun Mo's face was slightly distorted as he looked around at the Shura guards, as if he was still looking for something. He was extremely unwilling to give up, but in the end, he still couldn't find anything. There was an unconcealable sense of disappointment on his face. All right, the world of slaughter truly lives up to its name. The slaughterer taught by the Azura Divine Lord is truly, extraordinary in strength. Shangji flattered with a fake smile. The people of the killing world were all a bunch of lunatics. He stood up and said to Ji Xiang, sorry for disturbing you. Goodbye. You're leaving? Don't you want to have a few more battles? I have a lot of red elites under my command, and all of them are at the immortal level. You can send some immortal generals who are at least 50,000 years old to spar with you. Ji Xiang was not satisfied yet, as if he was trying to persuade the guests of the Tianzhou divine region to stay. No, I have many things to do in the deity world. Shangji waved his hand repeatedly. A newly ascended heavenly wheel expert was already so perverted, and the ghosts still continued to spar with him. Translation is Xian's translation. Shangji Yunji understood what he meant. If the Shura world god realm killed Qin Hao before they arrived, everything would make sense. Haha, the divine masters are powerful. Why are you so foolish? The mirror can indeed reverse one's Tao. However, the divine weapon of chaos has its own limitations. It is ineffective against most divine masters. If the Shura world god realm killed and stole divine master Xianqi, please tell me, what's the use of him taking the mirror? Jun Mo put his hands behind his back. Xianqi did not expect this. You have all seen the Slayer's power. As his master, the Shura world god realm is very powerful. I'm sure Shangji Yunji can't guarantee that you can handle him. Of course, I don't mean to belittle you. What divine master Xianqi said has made me understand something. The Shura world god realm is a training ground. He can't use the mirror, but his subordinates can. Jun Mo's eyes shone with a sharp light. Perhaps Xianqi was right. The Shura world god realm could have killed Qin Hao and taken the mirror. The Shura world god realm was cruel by nature. He had been training his troops for 10,000 years. Compared to the mirror, which method was faster and more effective? The answer was obvious. When he thought about how Qin Hao had died at the hands of the Shura world god realm, Jun Mo felt pity for him. However, these were all his guesses. He could not make a conclusion based on guesses alone. In any case, he would not give up. If Qin Hao was dead, he would think of a way to get the divine weapon of chaos back from the Shura world god realm. It would be better if Qin Hao was not dead. He could kill and steal. Jun Mo would also pay attention to the massacre world. He needed to go back and think of a plan. The next time he came, he would definitely get the final answer. Buzz. The cloud light disappeared in the vast, untainted land. Jun Mo returned empty-handed after this trip. Moreover, he no longer associated Qin Hao with the perfect heavenly wheel that was full of evil qi in the Azura field. When he first saw the perfect heaven wheel, at that moment, Jun Mo was almost certain that it was Qin Hao himself. Huang Dao's death had made him sober up. Such a heavy evil qi, full of murderous intent. Even Jun Mo felt a chill run down his spine when he looked at the evil spirits in the enchantment. It was completely different from Qin Hao, who was proficient in alchemy and sword arts. They were two completely different people. There were many palaces above and below the Shura world god realm. The Shura palace at the top was the bedroom of the supreme Shura immortal master. Below the immortal master's bedroom, according to the difference in strength, many cloaked immortal generals also had their own private palaces. Since we have reached this step, we could be considered brothers. Hidden Ghost reached out his hand towards Jia Kang. Yes, of course. Good brother. Jia Kang's hand shook the others tightly. Ying Luo nodded silently at them. They were all selected from death. Out of the 2,000 heavenly wheels, only the 4 of them were left. In order to kill Huang Dao, they could be considered to have gone through thick and thin together. It's a pity the scar didn't last till the end. Hidden Ghost let go of Jia Kang's hand. A trace of sadness appeared on his face. Scarface's godly source was crushed by Huang Dao, but he had already fought so hard to survive. After 500 years of fighting and hunting in the divine territory, he could have soaked in this blood pool like them. However, in the end, he was still one step away. Jia Kang and Ying Luo lowered their heads slightly. Affected by their emotions, they also felt a trace of sadness in their hearts. I think you should forget about the idea of becoming brothers. The Shura guards don't have brothers. At this time, a tall divine general walked over and stopped at the edge of the blood pool. He lowered his head and looked down at the 4 new heavenly wheels who had just joined him. Divine General Mo Tuesday Whoosh. The 4 of them stood up at the same time and bowed to Mo Tuesday. Mo Tu waved his hand and said, "Forget it. This blood pool is the essence of the world of massacre. It can increase your divine power and heal your injuries. Becoming a Shura guard is only the first step for you to establish yourself in the divine territory. There will be more training in the future. Remember my words. Other than serving the divine master loyally, don't have any other thoughts." After Mo Tu finished speaking, he left directly. At this moment, Jia Kang and the others felt a little depressed. It was still the world of massacre. Even on the Azura Peak, they could only be cold tools. They were only fit to be controlled by God Lord Azura. Qin Hao closed his eyes again and lay in the blood pool. He thought of old Eaglehead, Judah, Li Li, and the others. In the Hua God world, the Hua God was the only ruler. With him taking care of them, the 8 little demons should be living well. The world of Massacre was only a scenery on the road. Just like what Teacher Blindsore had said, the infinite divine world was also a scenery on the road for Qin Hao. He should not be reluctant to leave. Next, I have to wait for the right time and think of a way to cross the world of Massacre. Although Qin Hao's eyes were closed, he gave off a sharp feeling. He had successfully evaded Jun Mo's pursuit and deceived God Lord Azura's eyes. Even if God Lord Azura had a trace of suspicion, he would not be able to find anything that could be used against him. In that case, he could cultivate peacefully on the Azura Peak and use the Azura Peak's resources to strengthen his divine Tao. He could not be anxious.